The day he met her was just as snowy. Kione, January 1st, an annual sacred festival held to offer gifts to the gods. In this small village, there is only one cook. His name is Julitan. He was tasked with sacrificing Fester, the largest offering to the gods. Steon, a scholar, approached him. It was probably the largest Fester he had ever seen. Therefore, Julitan had to do everything carefully. There was no need to worry. He could cut Fester open even with his eyes closed. This scholar was grumbling as usual. The guy just wanted to get this over with and go home. He approached the fish and even decided to start with the belly. With one smooth motion, he began to cut. What he clearly didn't expect was to see a human inside Fester. There was a girl holding something in her hands. Right inside the fish's belly, a man was sleeping peacefully, hugging a sword. That was their first encounter. Inside the house, a doctor began to examine her. Julitan even blushed. This girl is still breathing. But that's exactly the problem. He simply couldn't believe that a person could survive in Fester's stomach. And if you remember that she was holding a giant sword in her hands, that also raises suspicions. Therefore, he assumed that this woman might not be human at all. He could be wrong. But when he was studying in the capital, he heard about something like this. He would come back to examine her. But for now, Julitan had to keep an eye on her. Julitan was surprised when he heard that the man wanted to leave him alone with her. After all, he himself had said that she was probably not human. But the doctor quickly left. He looked at her sleeping body and hoped that she would not wake up suddenly. If you looked closely, she was beautiful. He even became curious about what she would look like when they opened their eyes. He even began to fantasize about how she would start to wake up. Then Julitan proudly declared that he had been watching over her the whole time she was unconscious. The girl sat up and asked if he was the one who had saved her. He was embarrassed. Julitan told her that he had found her helpless in the belly of a fish. Then she would have thanked him for saving her from death. Such a situation is also quite possible. After all, he had saved her from death. But who would have thought that she would wake up at that very moment? He jumped up immediately and screamed in fright. She tilted her head looking at this man. Julitan tried to collect his thoughts and tell her that he had found her in the belly of a fish that day. The girl demanded that he tell her his name. It was quite unusual, but he did as she asked. After that, she called him Master Julitan. Then she asked Master Julitan to tell her his name. However, the boy, of course, did not know it. In that case, she asked him to give her a name. The guy was surprised that she wanted him to give her a name. As a sign of agreement, she nodded. Julitan began to suspect that she might have lost her memory. Meanwhile, he was leafing through a rather interesting book. He did not expect his guesses to be true. It all starts with Togo, as soon as the contract is signed. Even though he didn't expect it, he was still right. If this woman had already woken up, he was in danger. The very book he had been reading was lying on the floor. Once a master chooses the name of his seal, an unbreakable bond is created between them by contract. The contract can only be broken in the event of the master's death or if he passes the seal on to another person. It's surprising that she doesn't even remember her own name. Apparently, she will need a temporary name until she remembers her real one. After thinking for a moment, his attention was drawn to a red bead necklace. Julitan came up with a name, Carnelian. The boy asked her what she thought of the name. The girl also said the name, as if tasting it. In fact, Carnelian's eyes reminded him of those stones. They were so bright and so mesmerizing. Just like her beautiful eyes. Carnelian. It's a beautiful name. From now on, that's what she'll be called. Julitan was glad that she liked the name. Suddenly, the same doctor who had told him to stop ran in. The window behind him suddenly opened. Snow began to blow into the room. The seal, now named Carnelian, began to swear allegiance to the knight Julitan. She swore allegiance to him as her master. They sleep an eternal sleep in mines, caves, and forests scattered throughout the world. In the world, there are creatures whose great power can only be awakened and used by special people. And the name of these brave individuals who are able to turn their abilities to their advantage is subordinates. They are able to enter into a contract with these creatures. Outwardly, they resemble humans, but they possess powers that stir the imagination. They will serve their master forever. However, if their master dies, they will fall back into a deep sleep. Those who have lived for thousands of years, constantly waking up and falling asleep, they are called seals. He has heard of the so-called seals. However, he does not know that they can be found in the stomach of a fish or awakened by an ordinary village cook. Julitan, of course, understands everything, but he wanted to at least give up. However, Carnelian was against it. The boy asked Steon if the seals were really that powerful. Their abilities are unique, especially those who possess unusual weapons. Their strength is equal to 1,000,000 soldiers. However, Carnelian believed that they were slightly underestimated. It wasn't just 1,000,000 soldiers. She was capable of wiping a couple of countries off the face of the earth without batting an eyelid. So now she hopes he understands why an ordinary cook shouldn't have awakened her. Julitan insisted that he hadn't awakened her. She woke up on her own. How many times did Carnelian have to repeat herself? It happened because he gave her a name. In fact, he thought the seals were submissive. Well, What about her? This young man doesn't exude any submissive power at all. She didn't feel any resonance between their souls. He doesn't feel anything like that either. This idiot doesn't even understand that this is the whole problem. Steon suggested simply passing her on. However, that's not such a bad option. Julian asked what he meant by pass her on. We just need to pass the seal on to someone who can subjugate her. If that person gives her a different name and Julitan agrees to the transfer, then she will belong to that person. Julian didn't understand anything, but it seemed that they even had a way to fix the situation. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. However, she had her suspicions. Would there even be a knight in this small village? To tell the truth, there was one knight here. Bellissima. Icates, the seal. He placed the food on the table. She thanked him for the meal. Icates felt the seal awaken yesterday, but the feeling was familiar to him. The lady suggested that they might know each other. Lee Dietrich, the first knight of Lysenborough. That's true. She has a very painful past. She once said that she didn't want to awaken anymore. A cool evening breeze blew into the room. Now everything was clear to her. Lee Dietrich hoped that she had been subdued by a good man, since she had awakened again. But he was still looking for her. Where could she have gone? In the distance, he saw Carnelian sitting down. A sword lay beside her. She seemed to have a sad look on her face, as if she had remembered something. Finally, Julitan found her. Carnelian asked if her subjugator had come. It was true. He was very angry and waiting for her. But she was talking about that cook, Julitan. He was still her owner. It seemed like he didn't quite understand what she meant. She decided not to dwell on it. Carnelian asked if he was sure the knight was here. She couldn't sense even a hint of his power. Seori Castello, the son of the local lord. How dare they make the young Lord Castello, the chief heir and valiant knight, wait. They must bring her here immediately. Steon asked him to wait a little longer. However, Seori didn't want to hear anything from him. Did he really think that the man had come all this way just for Togo? To talk to commoners? Steon pointed, indicating that they had arrived. Behind the young lord were Julitan and Carnelian, swords in hand. He seemed to fall in love with her the moment he saw her. Seori began to run around her. He shouted enthusiastically about how beautiful she was. Seori wanted to give her a name. Carnelian said that Mr. Julitan had already named her. He knew that very well. But Seori was here to save her from this nobody. Julitan wondered if all nobles were like this local lord's son. He didn't want to wait any longer, so he told the boy to hurry up. In that case, he must tell Julitan her name. Seori decided to name her Castella. Now she would be called Castella. The others didn't know if he was serious. Now, if the current owner agrees, the transfer will be complete. Julitan wondered if everything would be all right if he became her master. The girl asked her master to complete the transfer. She agreed. Seori asked why he was just standing there. He should agree quickly. In any case, a knight would be better than an ordinary cook. Therefore, he agreed to transfer the seal. Seori wanted to see Castella's pretty face. As soon as he reached out to her, she suddenly hit him. It doesn't work that way. So she demanded that the pig take his hands off her. It seems her name is Carnelian after all. Steon wondered what that meant. It only means that both subordinates are so pathetic that the transfer is impossible. In which case, he had no idea how the cook had managed to wake her up. She didn't know herself. But Carnelian was glad that at least she wouldn't have to bear the miserable name that Seori had given her. He couldn't allow her to be rude to him. Besides, the man was determined to get her at any cost. However, the girl declared that he wouldn't succeed anyway. He pointed his sword at Julitan. Since this simple peasant did not want to give up his precious possession willingly, he would simply take it himself. After he killed the cook, he would teach her some manners. He was clearly insane. This nobody should be proud to have the honor of dying by Castello's hand. At that moment, Carnelian took his head. If dying is an honor for him, then let him die. The cook probably thinks the same, but you could see in his eyes that he was thinking about something else entirely. He screamed in fear. Carnelian was displeased that her precious sword was covered in the pig's blood. Julitan couldn't believe that she had just killed a man. But if she hadn't done it, he would have killed Julitan. However, that doesn't change the fact that she just killed him. The truth was that Carnelian didn't care about his opinion. The death of the subordinate would prove problematic. The guards immediately grabbed their weapons, not understanding how she dared to do such a thing to Sir Castella. Suddenly he noticed that something was wrong with this girl. She was clearly not herself. She's broken. We need to destroy the seal quickly. However, those were his last words. Another guard attacked her, but she managed to block his sword. After that, she was able to strike with the second sword. She wasn't the only girl who had gone mad. They wanted to kill her too. But of course, this guard was also too weak to do so. She managed to push him away using her released power. Julitan wondered why they had suddenly started fighting each other. The seals were broken. When the subjugator dies, the seal loses its mind. The guy asked how to stop it. Carnelian replied that they would rage for a while and then calm down. However, the guards were unlikely to survive until then. She could have taken his arm with a single movement. It was simply a bloody massacre in which the guards could do nothing. Seeing his comrades dying in vain, he simply decided to flee. However, the guy tripped over a rock and fell to the ground. At that moment, another girl rushed toward him. He could only watch in panic. As luck would have it, a blood-stained sword was also flying toward him. Carnelian easily deflected it. These two crazed seals turned their attention to her. Carnelian replied that now they had switched their attention to him. She simply watched as the two charged forward with their energy unleashed. In truth, Carnelian did not like fighting other seals. However, in this situation, there was nothing else to do. Then the first one attacked her. Julitan shouted for her to be careful. Carnelian managed to jump up before she could strike her. Then, while in midair, she also struck her. And once again, a murder took place before his eyes. The others just watched the carnage in shock. They discussed how Carnelian had jumped so high and defeated the seal with a single blow. This woman is also a seal. This was Julitan's seal. All this carnage was too much for his young mind. He was even afraid of the blood on his body and clothes. Because of all the commotion, the boy started vomiting. Carnelian asked if he was okay. Julitan thanked her for saving him. Thanks to her, he was still alive. Perhaps he had misunderstood. She had already told him that seals went berserk when they lost their master. Even weak seals were susceptible to this. So the girl asked him what he thought would happen to her. Nevertheless, he was still grateful to her. She just sighed at this pathetic subordinate. He couldn't even make a proper exchange. After that, the two stood and watched as the area was cleared, and how the bodies of the dead were covered. Steon approached them and asked what they planned to do. Carnelian asked what he meant. Didn't she understand what the Lord would do when his son, soldiers, and seals had been killed? But she hadn't killed his soldiers. And if this was just a simple Lord's army, she could deal with them in seconds. However, he didn't ask how long it would take her to do so. Did he really prefer that she kill them slowly? He was more cruel than she had first thought. She had misunderstood everything. Even if she killed the Lord's army, stronger armies and seals would be sent. An army from a neighboring kingdom. Or even the Imperial army might come. How terrifying it was to hear that they would simply come to avenge the son of a village lord. Steon sighed, saying that the Lord was an aristocrat after all. Even if the kingdom's army came here, it would only take 2 days. However, Julitan interrupted their conversation. He asked her not to kill anyone else. Just because they were pitiful and weak didn't mean their lives didn't matter. In this world, there are no people who deserve to die. In that case, Carnelian wanted to know why he had remained silent while that pig was still alive. He was just a fragile and weak submissive. So what did he want her to do? The guy just fell silent. After a minute of thinking, he wanted to go and explain the whole situation and ask for mercy. Carnelian found it funny. Carnelian asked him what he wanted to explain. That they had killed his son, but sincerely asked for forgiveness. Did he seriously think that would work? But you never know until you try. Steon decided to try. Carnelian asked if these people had all lost their minds. There is no other way out. He will try to explain the whole situation to her. Why the exchange did not take place and why the massacre began. He will be able to show her the truth. It would be better if he did it than Julitan. A little later, she stood over the graves of the seals and remembered what had happened. How she had killed them with her own hands. Carnelian looked sadly at the graves. Julitan approached her. His presence she had sensed long ago and asked if something was wrong. The boy apologized. He hoped he hadn't disturbed her. Carnelian asked what he wanted. He happily announced that Steon had returned. She clearly hadn't expected him to actually return. Julitan thought that everything must have gone smoothly. Carnelian asked if he hadn't even been beheaded. The boy replied that of course not. Then she thought that maybe he had lost an arm or a leg. Everything was fine. The Lord said he wanted a personal apology. Julitan jumped up immediately. He knew Steon would succeed. Carnelian was skeptical about the apology. She couldn't understand what kind of idiot would need an apology from the murderer of his own son. Steon asked why she was so pessimistic. Perhaps she had seen a lot of bastards in 1,000 years. He could think whatever he wanted. She wasn't going to justify herself. Julitan began to ask Carnelian to help him one more time. She could only sigh at the request. The girl agreed. After all, it was her master's order. The man informed his master that they were already on their way. Lancer Costello, my lord. He called for Joga. After him, a hooded man appeared and asked the lord what he should do. Lancer told him to prepare the best knife for the guests. They would simply cut off their skin before killing them. He was surprised when he heard that she didn't need food to survive. But even so, Julitan did not understand where she got so much strength. Carnelian explained that she absorbed energy from her surroundings. It was something like photosynthesis in plants. It was clear that the guy had no idea what photosynthesis or energy were, so she just told him not to bother his head with nonsense. She saw the food in his hands, so she decided to take it. Julitan didn't understand what she was doing, because she had just said she didn't need to eat. The girl replied that she wouldn't die of hunger, but she could still eat. She spat out what she was chewing because it was disgusting. He remembered Steon's words about how seals had a very long life, and they changed their master many times, so the guy wanted to know who her previous owner was. It must have been some important night. Carnelian asked if he had heard anything about personal space. Julitan thought it was some kind of magic spell. It was a spell that prevented others from intruding on her personal affairs. She used this spell because she didn't want to hear any more questions and suggested they go to bed. He had no idea what was going on in her head. And again, at night, she was immersed only in her painful memories. In the morning, they finally arrived at a huge castle. Julitan couldn't believe his eyes. It was a magnificent castle. However, Carnelian thought it was modest. It didn't even stand out against the backdrop of the village. A servant came out to meet them and said that the Lord was waiting for the two of them. He saw that she was holding a sword and told her that weapons were not allowed inside. He said he would keep the weapon for now. Carnelian declared that anyone who tried to touch her sword would lose their hands. So the girl asked if he was sure he wouldn't regret his actions. He immediately took his hands off her. Julitan immediately turned to her. The girl replied that she would not go inside without her sword. He should apologize for both of them. The man asked for a moment, then immediately ran inside the castle. How problematic. A little later, he came out to them, saying that she could take her weapon with her. Then huge doors opened in front of them, leading into the room where the Lord was sitting. Carnelian and Julitan went inside. The guy gave his name and mentioned that he was a cook from the village of Kione. Then he greeted the Lord. Lancer had heard a lot about them. Julitan offered sincere apologies from the two men regarding his son. But it didn't matter to the Lord, so he told the young man to get up. This was an incident involving the breaking of a seal. The dead could not be brought back to life. He told the young man to come closer. Carnelian watched Lancer silently. The young man named Steon said that he had been raised in a village because he had lost his parents at an early age. Julitan confirmed that this was true. He was very grateful to them. Still, he put them in danger. Doesn't he think he should repay them by sacrificing himself? Several people gathered around her, forming a circle. Her body was bound in chains. It was clear that she was also struggling in the chains. Steon asked the Lord to spare at least the village. Doesn't Julitan think he's quite wise for a guy from a small village? The main character didn't want to believe what he was saying. After that, the Lord threw him aside. What an idiot he is. He blindly trusted a man who had actually betrayed him. Lancer threatened that when she was sealed, he would cut his throat. At that moment, Carnelian intervened. She was tired of putting up with it all. She knew it would end this way. It was the most predictable move for the Lord of a small village. She was too bold to be sealed. The man wanted to see how she would speak when she was sealed. Carnelian could easily break the chains that were supposedly holding her back. What sealing were they talking about? They really do think that this will stop her. It's ridiculous to think that this weak thing could do that. The seal was broken. The burst of power threw everyone back. Lancer couldn't believe how she had done it. She had a principle: to get rid of people who were potentially capable of causing harm. And she still came here, knowing that this would happen. Carnelian replied that he should have understood that when she killed his beloved son. He immediately turned around, shouting that this girl shouldn't think this was the end. At that moment, she dropped her sword. He stabbed the very man whom the Lord had called. She found it funny that this rat was the ace up this man's sleeve. His whole body was shaking, causing him to fall straight to the floor. The girl began to slowly approach the body of that fucking bastard. She uttered a spell in her language. As a result, she was enveloped in blue mana. Now it was time for him to disappear from her sight. A huge blue flash burst out of the Lord's castle, completely destroying the building. A little later, he finally came to. Carnelian also noticed his awakening. Julitan tried to figure out where they were and what had happened to the Lord. Apparently, this guy still didn't understand anything. She pointed out that the Lord was somewhere there, somewhere under those rubble. The guy asked if she had known everything from the beginning. Like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Son and father are alike. A lot of problems would have come up later if she hadn't sorted things out now. So there was no need to feel sorry for her. She suggested they leave, as they still had things to sort out. A large crowd gathered in the middle of the village to see what had happened. She pointed her sword at Steon. Carnelian even decided to listen to his last words. Steon explained that he had no other choice for Togo to save the entire village. She could only laugh at this cliché. Julitan also tried to stop her. After all, he was trying to save the village. He was fine. However, Carnelian wasn't doing this for him. She was simply disgusted by Steon's words that he had no choice. Julitan asked what about the people she had killed. How would she be any different from them if she killed Steon? How unpleasant to hear all these words about differences. People had mocked her for centuries. There was nothing wrong with not becoming like them. She would live and die in hypocrisy and selfishness. Juliet doesn't know what she's been through, but he won't let it happen again. The guy didn't want to help her, so he asked her to stop hurting herself. In the end, she decided to agree to it. Carnelian declared that she would not kill anyone. What kind of master would beg for his seal? What kind of idiocy was that? Steon thanked Julitan. The main character hasn't forgotten that this man betrayed him. But he knows that Steon was really trying to protect the village. He promised he would help. That's why Carnelian thought he had some kind of plan. Julitan declared that he would do everything in his power. Then the girl interrupted him and said that he would become a knight and give her to a strong knight with lots of money and opportunities. He clearly didn't expect to hear that from her. First, they had to get to the city. There, they would find something. Steon said that the merchant who came for the festa was leaving tomorrow, so he thought the two of them could go with him. The road would be long, so he would help with the preparations. Carnelian noticed that he was just showing off. She simply decided to turn around and leave. Julitan noticed Steon. Steon couldn't even look him in the eye, so they decided to go together. These clothes were actually quite nice for the village. Julitan noticed that they suited her. The girl asked him what the huge bag was. People need to carry a lot of things with them, unlike seals. Carnelian sighed, saying that he wasn't the kind of knight who went on a journey to save the world. A merchant approached them. The man thought about the city with its many knights. Carnelian mentioned that they needed real knights, not imitations. Bellissima would be perfect for them. He had heard that there would be a knight tournament there in a week. It was clear that Julitan was hearing about this for the first time. Carnelian explained that it was a tournament where duels took place in the presence of the king. They organize a bloody mess for Togo so that the king will pay attention to them. The man mentioned that she would definitely get into trouble if she talked like that in town. In any case, there would be a couple of knights there. The man said he needed to go to Slocket so they could go with him. If they found a ship there, they would make it to the tournament in time. A little later, the girl asked him what he was thinking about. He had such a sour look on his face. He was born and raised in this village. Julitan had never even thought that he would ever have to leave it. Leaving always had to be sudden. And again, he didn't understand anything. Carnelian tried to calm him down, telling him that he was just going on a short vacation. As soon as they finished with this business, he would return to his village, Slocket. All the boats were already full. It seemed that the tournament was very popular. The next available boat would be after the tournament. Carnelian even suggested knocking a couple of people out and taking their places. Julitan told her not to even think about it. Then she suggested hijacking the entire boat. The guy told her to stop. They were too conspicuous. People were talking about how Lord Costello's entire castle had recently disappeared. But his companion thought he was just drunk. It couldn't be possible for an entire castle to just disappear. It's better not to attract attention right now. Carnelian asked what they would do then. A man who had overheard them approached them. These kids need a ship to Bellissima. Julitan replied that this was true. The man happily informed them that they had 2 places available. The man asked if they were interested in the offer. Julian replied that of course they were. What a relief. They didn't even know what to do anymore. All the boats were full, but by some miracle they even had some free spots. She emphasized the word accidentally, just like he had. The man immediately replied that if they refused, he wouldn't mind. Julian immediately began to say that they agreed. He asked to be taken to the ship. The man mentioned that they had made a good choice. At this time of year, getting to Bellissima is as difficult as getting to the moon. Benny, sailor. Julitan turned to Carnelian, saying that it was a great relief. She just sighed again. The girl wondered if he was too kind or too stupid. But of course he had bad intentions. Benny showed them the ship they would be sailing on. Julitan thought it looked powerful. Carnelian noticed that his optimism knew no bounds. If the winds were favorable, it would take them only 3 days to reach Bellissima. Benny suggested they climb aboard. As soon as they boarded, the man greeted the crew. However, for some reason, they were not very friendly toward the newcomers. Carnelian and Julitan noticed this too. They went downstairs, and the man explained that, unfortunately, these guys would not be able to share a room. The rooms were divided by gender. They were already trying to take as many passengers as possible. Julitan replied that they didn't need anything else. Carnelian asked why he was suddenly talking about this. Benny saw their frightened faces and started teasing them. Julitan replied that it wasn't like that at all. Carnelian said she hadn't meant to. He showed them which way the women's room was. The men's room was on the floor below. While Benny and Julitan were going downstairs together, Carnelian watched Benny closely. The guy went inside, but he was tense because of the passengers. But even judging by the state of their clothes, it was clear that they were not sitting there voluntarily. At that moment, Julitan heard a bang. He tried to leave, but realized that the doors had been locked from the outside. The man told him not to even try. They wouldn't open it until the ship departed. Julitan asked why that was. Another man was surprised that he had boarded the ship without knowing anything. Officially, this ship didn't exist. Even if one of them disappeared, no one would ever know. The guy began to guess that they were involved in human trafficking. Immediately, bad thoughts about Carnelian came to his mind. Julitan demanded that they open the door. They tried to stop him, because there was no point in making such a fuss. It would be better for him to be quiet. However, he didn't have time for that. The ship was in danger. He saw a chest standing below. He then used the chest to break the handle. The man clearly didn't expect the doors to open so easily. Julitan immediately ran out because he needed to find Carnelian urgently. The boy climbed up and entered the room where the women were sitting, but she was not there. He heard some noises and immediately ran toward them. In his mind, he asked Carnelian not to let what happened in the Lord's castle because of her happen again. If this ship was destroyed because of her overwhelming power, they would not be able to reach Bellissima. He climbed up and shouted the word "Stop." There he saw Carnelian sitting, having already dealt with the crew. How brave of the master. He had come to save her. Julitan admitted that he had indeed come to do that. Although it would be better to say that he had come to stop her. It seemed like he thought she was going to destroy the entire ship. Carnelian tried to keep an eye on them, as they looked suspicious. It felt like they were up to something illegal. Most likely, selling people. Benny was lying under the other bodies, insisting that wasn't the case. It was logical that anyone would deny it in such a situation. Benny kept saying that it wasn't true. The alleged hostages approached them, not understanding what was happening. Carnelian replied that they didn't need to thank her. She hadn't even tried to save them. However, the people didn't understand what these bastards had done to the sailors. That wasn't the reaction she expected. A little later, Benny explained that getting into Bellissima without money or status was no easy task. That's why they were helping them unofficially. Julitan apologized for the misunderstanding. Benny replied that everything was fine. They were also to blame for not explaining anything. After that, the man asked who they were. Carnelian said she was a seal, and that guy, the knight in training. They had business in Bellissima, so that's where they're going. He clearly didn't expect to see a knight's seal on the ship. This guy looks a bit dim, but she's very strong. Benny asked if they really didn't know about the knight's ship. A separate ship is allocated for the knights for the royal tournament. Everyone gets their own room and high-quality meat. Now they realized what a mistake they had made. This ship doesn't have that. Carnelian replied that it was obvious. They also still owed money for the riot they had caused. Or did he really think he could just take it and forget about it all? Julitan admitted that they had no money left. If there was no money, they would pay in another way. Selbender. Oberammergau. Sitting on the balcony, he watched the beautiful weather. A girl approached His Majesty. He had told her not to call him that when they were alone. Michelle, the seal, called him Sir Offenbach. Michelle said that Garang had woken up. Offenbach asked who had woken her. She wasn't sure about the subordinate, but she felt her presence, so she really had returned. He returned to solid ground and turned to Michelle. The man demanded that Michelle find Garang and bring her to him. Germain Offenbach, first emperor of Okalanta. Carnelian was serving food. The girl told them not to rush as the food wasn't going anywhere, and Julitan was busy cooking. It was not for nothing that he had been a cook in the village. She sat down at the table with the others, saying that sailors eat a lot. They hadn't eaten such delicious meat in a long time. Benny didn't expect the knight to be such a good cook. It was incredible. Carnelian was angry because that was all he knew how to do. Then the girl asked if this would be enough to repay him. Benny replied that of course it wasn't. That wasn't all. Carnelian immediately became angry at his response. Benny laughed, saying it was a joke. Now that they had eaten their fill, it was time to have some fun. The sailors were happy that they had finally eaten their fill. If only breakfast had been like this. Carnelian tried to beat one of the passengers. Meanwhile, Julitan entertained everyone along with Benny and the little children. And so the next day arrived. Julitan didn't even think that this was how he would have to leave Kione. All the events that had happened before flashed through his mind. How he had met Carnelian. How the seal had sworn him confidence. How they couldn't pass the seal on to someone else, which led to the massacre. And how Carnelian destroyed the castle. And how she wanted to kill Steon, and Julitan stopped her. Benny approached the guy and asked him why he was standing there alone. Julitan replied that he was just thinking about his homeland. For someone from a small village, the world seems very big. That's natural because the world really is very big. Benny had been to many places, so he decided to show him something. He pointed to Slocket on the map. That was where they had set sail from. And here, across the ocean, was Bellissima. That was where they would land. Bellissima is one of the cities of the Kingdom of Reisenberg, and Reisenberg is one of the many kingdoms that are subject to the Hesfarkan Empire. That's not all. In addition to the Hesfarkan Empire, there is also the Garbad Empire. Furthermore, there is also the Dalekot Empire. Now Julitan truly understood that the world was incredibly vast. Benny wanted to show him something even more amazing. He hadn't tried it himself, of course, but he had heard that if you crossed the ocean, you could find a continent. It was much larger than all the others put together. Benny wanted to travel around the whole world and help people get where they needed to go. He even told Julitan to let him know if he ever needed a ride somewhere. After that, the two said goodbye to Benny and the other sailors. Bellissima. There were many people on the street, and Julitan noticed that it was much warmer here than in Sloket or Kione. There were so many people and such large buildings. Carnelian replied that this was the imperial city of Hesfarkona. Of course it would be big. He should stop talking like a country bumpkin. It was time for the master to start talking like a knight. He must have heard Benny say that lodging and food were free. The girl asked if he was even listening to her. The boy's attention was drawn to something else. There's a beast walking on 2 legs over there. Carnelian shouted that she was talking to him. Was this his first time seeing an orc? He looked like a peasant. This was one of the other times. They hadn't always been so obedient. But then, people enslaved them. Not just orcs. Even before she fell asleep. People enslaved everyone, from elves to trolls. Julitan thought it was a cruel story. Suddenly, there was an earthquake. He heard someone say that it was Sir Kudro. The guy immediately turned his attention back. He was told to kneel down if he didn't want to die. Kudro, a prominent merchant of Bellissima, called him an insolent fool. How dare he stand in the way of the great merchant Kudo? Julitan apologized. However, the man was very angry. He asked where the bastard was looking. He was dumber than a pathetic orc. He ordered the elephant to crush this pathetic bastard. Of course, Carnelian came to his defense. Kudro didn't understand what kind of power that was. Carnelian's entire body, like her sword, was enveloped in mana. Julitan knew she shouldn't do that. With one swift blow, Carnelian sliced through the merchant's elephant. Because of this, Kudro fell. He screamed in fear as soon as he saw blood everywhere. The girl couldn't understand how a petty merchant dared to stand in the way of a knight. Julitan asked if he was really a knight. Carnelian shouted at him to shut up. But then she changed her tone and asked the knight to be quiet. The merchant couldn't believe it because this knight was behaving like a fool. These two must be playing a joke on him. Carnelian pointed her sword at the stupid haggler, who gave him permission to speak. Julitan didn't understand how they had even gotten to this point. He also noticed that the girl seemed to be enjoying it. Carnelian said that unlike these guys, her knight was extremely generous, so this merchant should beg for mercy. He probably didn't know this, but if he knelt down and begged for mercy, he could save his own life. Kudro shouted that she was too insolent. This man's stupidity knows no bounds. The merchant began by claiming that these cowardly little men dared to attack him when his guard was down. Carnelian told him to shut up if he didn't want to die. He looked at the guy and decided to challenge him to a duel. Julitan asked why he was being called to a duel. Kudro explained that the seals acted solely on the orders of their master. He turned to Carnelian, saying that this man apparently did not understand everything well. The girl asked the master to give her his command. Should she cut him vertically, just as she had cut his beast? Kudro replied that in 3 days he would find a place for the duel, so they should not even dare to run away. Carnelian laughed at Togo as he ran away. This is not good if things continue like this, according to Julitan. The guy didn't understand why it had provoked him like that. There was no need to worry. The duel the man had mentioned was a duel between seals. However, Julitan believed that this man was definitely targeting him. Carnelian mentioned that duels were held between seal masters. Instead of worrying, it would be better to find an inn first. She noticed her clothes. She needed to change and tidy herself up, but they didn't have a penny to their name. However, they had a wonderful knight-errant. So what was there to worry about? The seal they had been talking about had arrived in Bellissima. He thought they were close. Lee Dietrich asked if he was talking about the seal with the painful past. Exactly. It takes incredible strength to awaken that seal. Whoever awakened it must be the best knight in the Empire. A knight like that appeared right before the royal duel. Lee Dietrich must see it with her own eyes. The lady asked if Akats could find them. The seal replied that he needed to make a few preparations. Everyone was discussing the same guy, the evil wandering knight. Their eyes were fixed on Julitan. What on earth was going on in this world? Kudro had almost been beheaded. The man greeted the knight. They hoped that the knight would enjoy his time here. The guy wanted to clarify something. Suddenly, Carnelian struck him. She pretended to be concerned for the knight, as his wound had reopened. Carnelian had told him to be a knight. The girl explained that the knight had been seriously wounded in the last battle, and he was in a very bad mood after meeting someone who didn't know about knightly honor. For them, it was important to be of service to such a righteous knight. He asked permission to escort the two to a better room. After that, they entered the room. A change of clothes and a bath had been prepared especially for them. The man hoped they would rest well. Actually, things weren't so bad here. Carnelian asked what had happened. Was he really not going to stay here? Julitan was nervous that they would be in the same room. He looked the same as he did on the ship. Could it be that he was having wild thoughts? You didn't answer that it wasn't true. Carnelian laughed. Julitan asked why she was laughing. He's so silly. Did this guy really think that the seals would be kept in a separate room? For knights, seals are no different from swords or shields. Who, in their opinion, should take a separate room for a sword? How naive this guy is. A little later, he was eating an apple at the table. The bathroom door opened, and she came out. The boy heard her say that it was very refreshing after such a day. Julitan immediately became embarrassed as soon as he saw her clothes. Carnelian asked what was wrong. The boy asked what she had done with the clothes they had given her. She had simply altered the clothes to suit her taste. The girl didn't want to wear those old-fashioned things. She even thought she could say she was a little ahead of her time. Carnelian asked him how he felt now. Wasn't it cool to be a knight? He had been given a free room, free food, and free clothes. So what if it's good? He's not even a real knight. The guy is always afraid that they will be exposed. There was no need to worry. Who would dare suspect a sinister wandering knight of anything? Hadn't he seen how the innkeeper trembled with fear? She thought she would die of laughter. But the guy replied that it wasn't funny. Suddenly, she felt something. Carnelian immediately stood up. Julitan asked what was wrong. She sensed someone approaching, and someone very powerful. The young people heard an apology for interrupting their rest. They were looking for a knight. A knight named Lee Dietrich was looking to meet them. She had heard of the Dietrich family. This family of knights was recognized by the Empire. In that case, they must not have any evil intentions. Although Carnelian wasn't so sure, she didn't sense any desire to kill. Since they have no desire to kill, he has no objection to them entering. The female knight apologized for the sudden visit. The royal knight of Reisenberg, Lee Dietrich, gave her name. She had come in search of the great knight she had heard about. Julitan didn't even know how to respond to that. He greeted her, saying he was glad to meet her. Lee Dietrich thanked him for his warm welcome. What an idiot. He's practically shouting that he's a village idiot. What will they do if they are exposed? Sir Knight is free and does not belong to any country. Carnelian asked her to understand that he did not wish to reveal his origins. Juliet replied that this was true, and he invited her to sit down. She wondered about the knight who was hiding his origins. What else could they be hiding? There were fireworks. Karina watched them. A seal. Karina was intrigued, as it looked like some kind of festival. Zelid Vinkristen, the exiled knight. Let them enjoy the festival. After all, it would be even more interesting now, the royal arena. It's better that it's all problematic. She should have just killed him when she had the chance. Julitan thought she shouldn't be upset that she didn't kill someone. The guy noticed her sword. He was stupid, so he couldn't understand how she could cut something with it. Carnelian asked where he thought the strength to cut something came from. Julitan thought that the angle played a role. The real blade is in the heart of the owner, so it doesn't matter how sharp the sword is. Without desire, it can't even cut a sheet of paper. And most importantly, since it's not sharpened, she can sleep with it in her arms. It's especially cool in the summer. Carnelian remembered that she hadn't even told him the name of her sword. Julitan was surprised that it had a name, the Mad Blade of the Mistral. He liked it. Lee Dietrich and Ikatas came to them to find out how their preparations were going. Julitan greeted Lady Lee. Carnelian was glad to see Lady Lee, and then noticed that Ikates was there too. There was a difference in attitude. Lee Dietrich replied that they had just come to say hello. It may be a show, but it was still a duel, so they should be careful. Carnelian just laughed it off, saying that it was just a warm-up for her, so there was no need to worry. In that case, Lee Dietrich would support them from afar. After that, the Lady Knight and her seal left. On the same day that the knight and the seal arrived, Lee Dietrich brought cookies with her. She hoped they would like them. Carnelian noticed that they looked delicious. She apologized for the sudden visit. They just needed to make sure of something for the safety of Reisenberg. Lee Dietrich decided to ask directly. The knight wanted to know the reason for Sir Julitan's visit to Reisenberg. Just as the young man was about to answer, Carnelian interrupted him. She explained that Sir Julitan was a wandering knight. You travel to become stronger and do not interfere in the affairs of other countries, just as you do not work for them. If that was rude, Lee Dietrich apologized. The boy replied that it was all right. How commendable to face various difficulties for the sake of training. A little later, when she was already drunk, she noticed that Sir Julitan was different from other knights. Carnelian laughed, saying that he was very different. She only wanted to say that there wasn't a single thing he could do normally. But Julitan covered her mouth. The guy asked if he was really that different from others. He seemed like a man who was unattached and free to choose his own path. Julitan replied that he was not like that, quite the opposite. Looking at Sir Julitan, she felt uncomfortable that he was using his status as a royal knight as an excuse for Togo to be inattentive to his training. Carnelian pulled him out of his thoughts and asked if he had been listening to her at all. How could he even think about anything else when his seal was about to go to a duel? What an incompetent master. She would deal with this in the blink of an eye. Julitan just hoped everything would go well. Today is the day everyone has been waiting for. The duel between Sir Kadro and Sir Julitan is about to begin. Everyone present in the arena was eager to see this unforgettable duel. Carnelian entered the arena. The main character watched her exit. Kudro approached him and greeted Sir Julitan. Julitan's seal may be skillful, but the same can be said of his seal. Julitan noticed how much his attitude had changed after Kudro learned that he was a knight. And yet his seal looks incredibly powerful. Yasak, Kudro's seal. Carnelian covered her nose. She said she could smell the stench even from here. Because of those words, Yasak immediately lunged at Carnelian. She just watched the blow with a smile on her face. Julitan was worried about Carnelian. However, the girl was behind him, saying that he was as slow as his master. Yasak reacted immediately and wanted to strike again. However, Carnelian was faster than him and was already in the air. The girl landed on the arena floor without much effort. She heard words of discontent. The crowd didn't like that she kept running away. A seal should fight normally. Kudro also began to mock Togo, saying that the rumors about his seal being strong were false. She covered her nose again. Yasak lunged at her once again. Carnelian jumped back. She ended up behind him and kicked her opponent. It wasn't that she was just running away. She simply didn't want to stand next to him. Yasak became angry again and jumped up. Carnelian was able to block the attack without much effort. It was clear that the seal had no idea she was capable of such a thing. The girl wondered if he really thought he could defeat her if he caught her. She managed to knock the axe out of his hands. Carnelian brought him to his knees and thought that this poor guy must be having a hard time with such an incompetent master. Actually, it would be rather boring to end this way. Perhaps she should arrange an explosion for the finale. She cast a spell, and the others noticed the high-level magic. The spectators immediately noticed the fire falling from the sky. But the truth was that it wasn't Carnelian who did it. They immediately began to scatter as soon as they saw the stones flying straight at them. People started calling for help. A woman was holding her child in her arms. Fortunately, a shield appeared just in time. This shield was put up by Icates. Lee Dietrich shouted for everyone to evacuate the area. They were being attacked by an enemy country. They were almost at the city walls. There was an army with catapults. Part of the city was destroyed and on fire. There was fighting in the streets. A man was about to kill a poor woman kneeling before him. The woman begged for mercy. The man told her to shut up and accept her fate. As soon as the sword was near her hands, a shield appeared around the girl. Because of this, he couldn't hold the weapon in his hands. He had no idea where the shield had come from, but then he was pierced. It was Lee Dietrich. Lee Dietrich told her to hide somewhere, as it was not safe there. The woman thanked the Lady Knight. Icates noticed that things had calmed down a bit. Lee Dietrich wanted him to go to the garrison to block air attacks. The man asked what about her. She would head for the captured fortress wall. Lee Dietrich could deal with her on his own. If other places fell, it would be the end for them. The female knight also added that he would need a shield to stop the siege weapon. Icates put his strength into her weapon. Lee Dietrich also wanted to give him orders as his superior. If she died, he would have to find a new master. He clearly did not expect to hear such an order. Wars are unpredictable. Icates must find someone he can trust completely. In any case, he had to accept the order. After that, he fled. Lee Dietrich also set off to carry out her mission. Julitan was curious. Why had Lady Lee refused their help? The man was at a loss. He shouted for her not to come near him. However, these were empty words to Carnelian. The girl had no idea who these men were or why they had attacked. Lee Dietrich and Icates ran up to them. The girl asked if they were okay. They had heard the screams. Carnelian explained that they had just dealt with some punks who were getting in the way. Then she asked what was going on. Lee Dietrich explained that the country of Helmand had launched an attack, taking advantage of the noise created by the duel. They had never had good relations, but she didn't understand why they had done this now. Carnelian asked Lady Lee if they needed help. It was a bit boring, of course, but she could still help. Lee Dietrich thanked her for the offer, but they had to decline. This was Riesenberg's business. She didn't want to cause them any more trouble. It would be better for them to hide somewhere. The inner castle should be safe now. Knights are people who are willing to give their own lives for their beliefs. Free knights, on the other hand, can disregard their principles, whether it be honor or knightly dignity. For them, asking a free knight to help the country is the same as simply disregarding all their beliefs, and to get involved without any power is just stupid. It was hard for him to admit it, but she was right. Although, if you don't count Julitan, his seal has plenty of power. Meanwhile, the fighting continued. Helmand had been hostile before, but they had never acted so hastily. Lee Dietrich tried to figure out who was behind it. They noticed her immediately. She had the nickname Azure Predator. Using her strength, she managed to get rid of her attackers. Zelid watched it all unfold. Of course, he knew Lee. She was just as strong, but at the same time fragile. After that, Zelid decided to engage her in combat himself, drawing his weapon. Lee Dietrich immediately blocked his attack. After all, they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Lee Dietrich also recognized Zelid. The girl managed to push him away. Those present also noticed the attacker. His nickname was the dreaded Zelid. Now she understood why Helmand had attacked them so unexpectedly. It was Zelid Vinkristen. To be precise, the reason was her. If not for Lee Dietrich, why else would he have agreed to work for such a boring country? The girl didn't understand why Zelid was doing this, but that was clearly not something she should be thinking about right now. Karina probably felt the same way. She had some kind of weapon in her hands. With it, she was able to push Lee Dietrich away. Zelid took one of the two jars and poured its contents onto his sword. She noticed that it was poison. Zelid asked where her seal had gone. He needed to see the death of his master. Lee Dietrich replied that it was none of his business. At least Karina would see her last breaths. Lee Dietrich herself understood that it was very disadvantageous for her to prolong this battle. She had to finish it with one blow. Of all the people in Reisenberg, only she was capable of stopping Zelid. After that, they lunged at each other in attack. The man noticed that she was rushing straight at him. Lee Dietrich managed to cut him. Because of this, Zelid immediately jumped back. But the truth was that the cut was not deep enough. It seemed she was prepared to kill him at the cost of her own life. Was this the knightly honor she had come to embrace? The poison had already begun to spread. Sille declared that from that day on, there would be no more azure predators. He lunged at Lee Dietrich again. Karina noticed something and told the man to be careful. He had to stop immediately. Another person appeared who wanted to join their fight. If two attack one, it's not really fair. Karina thought she recognized that voice. It was Carnelian. She declared that they should fight at least with the same number of opponents. With the help of catapults, they attacked again. But there was a shield around the city. A subordinate reported that the catapult couldn't break through the shield of Reisenberg. The man ordered the attack to continue. It would be good to exhaust the seals. If they could get rid of Lee Dietrich, even the impregnable Reisenberg would fall. O'Connell, commander of Helmand. The bombardment continued. Ekates also noticed that Helmand's attacks were becoming more and more fierce. He hoped that Lady Lee was all right. It seemed they were a little late. Carnelian apologized, as her master had been thinking for a while. So we need to finish quickly since they're late. Old scenes immediately flashed through Karina's mind. Back then, Carnelian had also killed a man. Her expression at that moment was impossible to discern. The man, with his last ounce of strength, reached out toward Karina. He muttered something about his wife and sons. Karina's whole body was shaking. Then, as now, it was Carnelian, only under a different name. Karina wanted to kill her. She immediately slipped past her master and headed for another seal. Carnelian wondered if her greeting had been too aggressive. And only then did she notice her face. It seemed that Carnelian immediately remembered who she was. Carnelian immediately pushed her away with her sword. Karina wondered if she had already remembered her, and what she had done. Sille told Karina to stop. The long-awaited reunion turned into a mess. He suggested retreating for now. However, Karina was against it. Sille immediately became angry when he realized that she was going against his orders. Did she want to die? The horror on her face was immediately apparent. In the end, she had to agree to his order. Sille told her to stop arguing and go to the back. At that moment, she looked at Carnelian one last time, telling her to just wait. Karina would be back soon. Carnelian didn't take her threat seriously and said she would just wait. Karina asked Sille to wait for her. Nation of Helmand, Commander's Scarf. O'Connell asked why Sille hadn't fulfilled the contract. He had been so confident. Sille declared that he was the one who had failed to fulfill his part of the contract. O'Connell asked what he meant. Besides Iketes and Lee, there was another seal. Moreover, it was a high-ranking seal. He couldn't believe that there was another knight just like Lee. How unfortunate. They failed to properly assess the resources of the enemy country they were fighting. This simply cannot be. The ruthless wandering knight from the rumors. And now he serves Reisenberg. Sille reported that the contract had been terminated. He didn't care if O'Connell went around saying that he had lost the war because of him. He will mercilessly take away the right to lie from the weak. Ekates noticed that a day had already passed. She should return to the castle and recover. Lee Dietrich replied that Sille's poison was special, just like him. It wouldn't be so easy to get rid of it. She didn't understand why Sille had decided to appear before her as a mercenary from an enemy country. A couple of years ago, Sille told her that she was just a child, that she hurt others out of fear of being hurt herself. Had he come to see for himself? He was worried about Lady Lee. There was a knock at the door. Ekates realized that guests had arrived. He decided to greet them. As soon as he looked out, he saw that it was Julitan with gifts and Carnelian. Ekates led them into the house. Julitan asked the knight's lady how she was feeling. Lee Dietrich replied that she was fine, although her ball training had been postponed for the time being. She also mentioned, before forgetting, that the two should visit the castle of Reisenberg. His Majesty wished to thank them personally for protecting Bellissima. It was clear that he was nervous about the visit. Lee Dietrich asked if it would be too much trouble. Julitan was flattered and grateful. But then he admitted that he was not a knight. He was just a cook who didn't even know how to wield a sword. Carnelian didn't understand why he had told them that. Therefore, going to the castle would be a little difficult. Although they couldn't say it out loud, they already suspected that Sir Julitan was not a knight. He just laughed at Togo for knowing that too. However, there was no doubt that they had helped Reisenberg. Knighthood suited him better than those who simply called themselves by that title. Carnelian also said that it didn't matter what kind of knight he was. It would be better if they were praised and given food. She was also interested in something she wanted to ask Lady Lee. Lee Dietrich didn't mind answering. Earlier, she had looked familiar to this nightmarish guy. Lee Dietrich attacked him with the intention of killing him, but she didn't. If she didn't feel comfortable talking about it, she didn't have to. Lee Dietrich said that she had trained with the same teacher as Sille, because they knew each other. And they were also engaged. Just as she was about to continue her story, Carnelian suddenly tensed up. The same could be said of Ekates. The window broke. Carnelian carried Julitan away from the spot. Ekates put up a shield to protect Lee Dietrich. These were people they already knew. Sille came to make ends meet with Lee. Lee Dietrich replied that the war was already over. However, he had never cared about wars between small countries. She was furious because hundreds of people had died because of this war. Zelle had mentioned that she was a knight who earned her living through war, and yet she still blamed him. The man suggested they draw their swords. It was time to end this. Carnelian shouted for them to stop. Zelle had replied that she already had her own enemy, and that enemy was Karina, who was fighting alongside her rage. Because of this, Julitan fell. Carnelian didn't understand why she was so hung up on something that had happened many years ago. However, Karina didn't want to talk. She only wanted to kill her opponent. Because of this blow, part of the wall was broken. Carnelian was pushed out into the street. Julitan just watched silently as Karina walked toward his seal. But he was still worried about Carnelian. The girl got up and asked if she really wanted to die. This time, the knees didn't answer either and immediately moved to attack. Zelle replied that now no one would interfere with them. At the same time, Iketis was ready to raise his shield. Zelle couldn't understand how a pathetic puppet dared to stand in his way. Lee Dietrich mentioned that Ikats was not just some puppet. She then turned to the press, saying that she would fight this man one-on-one, and he should take care of the Julitanes. Iketes agreed, then went to Julitan. He didn't even expect her to want to fight alone. She shouldn't be so confident. Lee Dietrich didn't understand what he wanted after all these years. Zelle simply couldn't stand by and watch her play the knight. While Lee Dietrich didn't understand what was going on, he took the opportunity to attack her. The man mentioned that today, Knight Lee Dietrich would die. At the same time, Karina was fighting against Carnelian. Due to Karina's crazy attacks, Carnelian had to defend herself. After that, Karina attacked her again. Carnelian asked again why she was so fixated on what had happened many years ago. Karina was only enraged by her words about many years ago. She didn't understand at all what she had done back then. Karina wanted her to just die. Lee Dietrich also blocked Zelleda's blow. However, the poison in her body was also taking its toll. Watching their fight, Julitan didn't understand why Zelle was going so far. Iketes replied that knights take up arms for their country or their family. However, he himself was an exiled knight. Zelle was acting in his own interests. Then Lee Dietrich also said that Sir Julitan was different from other knights. It seemed as if he was not bound by anything and was free to choose his own path. Lee Dietrich felt uncomfortable because he was using his status as a royal knight as an excuse for not paying attention to his training. Zelle then said that he couldn't just stand by and watch her play the role of a knight. And then he said that today, Knight Lee Dietrich would die. Julitan began to understand what Zelle wanted to achieve. He found it funny to see an imperial knight who could barely stand up to an outcast. The title of Azure Predator did not live up to its name. Zelle attacked again. Lee Dietrich tried to withstand his blow, but it was clear that she was having a hard time fighting him. Thanks to his strength, he was able to knock the sword out of her hands. Lee Dietrich fell to her knees and a blade was pressed against her throat. Zelle said again that the existence of Knight Lee Dietrich would now come to an end. He even raised his sword to deliver the final blow. But at that moment, he dropped his sword. Zelle immediately turned around knowing who it was. Iketes had intervened. Lee Dietrich asked how Iketes could disobey her order. Regardless of the circumstances, the seal exists to protect its master. Zelle wanted to get rid of this bastard who had interfered with them. Iketes raised his shield. However, Zelle struck a blow that shattered his shield. He then struck Iketes again. In panic, she shouted Iketes' name. Zelle took the sword back into his hands. The seal attacked him to protect its poor master. It seems that he is more than just a puppet. He had to admit it after all. Since he was a rather interesting young man, he decided to let him live. But he still had to pay for the scene he had caused. At that moment, Lee Dietrich jumped in, preventing her seal from being killed and attempting to slash it. Lee Dietrich replied that they weren't done yet. Zelle just laughed. Now he finally saw a familiar face. An ordinary girl named Lee, hiding behind the brilliant facade of a knight. He decided to return to his seal. Julitan immediately ran to Carnelian. There he saw Karina kneel her down. It seems she can't even wake Mistral. You can't really call that revenge. Now let her just die. Karina called her by her old name, Garang. Fortunately, Carnelian managed to jump out of the way of her blow. She landed behind Karina. Carnelian didn't understand what she had done wrong, why Karina's master had died. But it was Garang who had killed her former master with her own hands, and that was when she had gone mad. Karina killed everyone she loved with her own hands, and now she claims that it was not her fault at all. Carnelian replied that it was all Karina's fault. She was desperate over the death of her master. She suffered because of the murder of her master's family. All of this is a consequence of her love for people, despite the fact that she is a seal. Julitan could only guess what they were talking about. Zelle approached him, and noticed that this high-ranking seal had a master who could not walk. Because of this, she cannot use even half of her power. Julitan asked what he meant. Didn't this guy know that the power of a seal depended on the abilities of its master? He was killing his own seal with his own hands. He remembered Carnelian's words that such a subjugator would never be able to awaken her. The words about him becoming a knight and passing her on to another knight who had plenty of money and skills. She always complained about his weakness. But Carnelian never said that he was the reason for her weakness. Zelle approached Karina to stop her. It was time to leave. She clearly didn't like this decision. However, he didn't want to hear her disobedience again. Because of this, she had to back down again. Sille looked at Lee Dietrich and mentioned that killing someone bound by their past was worthless. He also said something about the seal. After all, she wasn't to blame for her master's incompetence. After that, Sille left. Karina took one last look at Carnelian, then left as well. Julitan asked if she was okay. Carnelian honestly admitted that she had almost died. She hadn't even been able to protect her master. How ridiculous she was. However, Julitan clearly felt guilty that she had almost died. Carnelian advised him not to pay attention to what Sille had said. Subordinates should not feel guilty for killing or selling seals. Seals were born for this purpose. After that, Carnelian suggested they return. She was very tired from the battle. Lee Dietrich also looked down. There was a jar with some kind of liquid in it. As soon as she picked up the jar, she saw that it was an antidote. Sille had left it there on purpose. Carnelian and Julitan approached her. The girl asked if Lady Lee was all right. Lee Dietrich apologized for getting them involved in the battle. Carnelian told her not to worry about it. They were just glad that Lee Dietrich was unharmed. Julitan noted that he had burst in without warning and disappeared without a trace. What was he up to? Lee Dietrich also didn't understand what Sille had wanted from her. Much later, they were relaxing in their own hotel room. Julitan wondered if she would be okay. They had been wounded, yet they had gone to the castle immediately. Carnelian explained that it was part of the knightly code and loyalty. Julitan asked if they should go too. The girl replied that of course they should go. The king would not only praise them, Carnelian was sure that a couple of shiny and precious trinkets would be prepared for them. However, he wanted to ask Carnelian something. When she was fighting the seal, she kept talking about her master, and she also mentioned someone named Garang. He sensed her pressure and realized that this was not a topic they should discuss. Carnelian asked if the master remembered the personal space she had mentioned earlier. Then the girl asked if he had ever heard of personal space. He hadn't heard of it and thought it was some kind of spell. It's a spell that allows you to separate people from your personal life. Carnelian replied that she was under the spell, so he should stop asking questions and go to bed. He also remembered the spell that had been cast on her. Carnelian cannot tell the master this story. Julitan understood everything. It was getting late, so it was probably time for them to go to bed. Carnelian also said that he should go to bed early today. If she remembers correctly, tomorrow's journey will be quite difficult. In that case, Julitan would go to bed. Memories flashed through his mind. The man with wings had asked her to take his side, and then he said the name Garang. It was an order from Emperor Offenbach. Hesfarkin Castle. The seal with red eyes awoke. They must bring the seal back alive. They are currently in Reisenberg. He is strong enough for this task. This seal is precious to the first emperor. They cannot fail this mission. Hauptmann III, Emperor of Hesfarkin. Said von Russell accepts the mission from the emperor. Two seals walked beside him, Justin and Juliet. And of course the highest knight of Lichtigeria, Said von Russell. They were already on their way. Carnelian noticed that this guy was too quiet today, which was strange. What had come over him? Then she remembered what had happened yesterday, and that she couldn't tell the master her story. Carnelian wondered if she had been too harsh back then. Julitan finally spoke to her. It was too exhausting. He even asked her again if she was sure there was a village somewhere around here. Then she realized that he was just tired. She quickly showed him that they had finally arrived. He just needed to lift his head and look ahead. Finally, they would be able to rest. Suddenly, someone addressed them. Julitan even asked if he was sure he was talking to them. The stranger asked if there was anyone else there. These guys had to pay a toll if they wanted to enter the village, and if they didn't have any money, he would take this sword instead. Raspeng, a village boy. Silence fell. Carnelian laughed. She really thought she was going to die of laughter? Rasberg was furious because she didn't even know who he was. He is a knight beloved by the Azure Predator, Lady Lee. Sir Rasberg. Carnelian laughed even harder. What bragging. She even said that the master should learn from this kid. She turned to Sir Rasberg. No matter how shitty this world has become, a child who has not undergone the rites of passage cannot become a knight. And if he continues to lie, Sir Knight will scold him. His eyes lit up as soon as he heard that this guy was a knight. Could he really be a knight? Julitan wanted to clear up the misunderstanding between them, but the boy asked the knight to help him with his training. He had to become stronger. After all, he had someone to protect. They were already inside the house. Julitan was putting things away. He really did refuse him, which was unexpected. Unfortunately, Julitan couldn't help him. After all, he wasn't a knight. The boy was so serious, so he couldn't lie to someone like him. He didn't want to pretend to be a knight anymore. You can't become a knight with just a few words. Besides, being a cook isn't so bad. They even managed to get a nice room in exchange for cooking tomorrow. Carnelian decided to check the room for dust. It was clear that no one had cleaned it properly in a long time. Besides, this boy's father was a knight. So Julitan was sure that when he returned, he would get a real workout. The master is indeed forgetful. There is not a single decent knight among those who claim to be knights. Only those who chase after women say such things. Unfortunately, this young man may never see his father again. He was even a little upset about it. Seeing his mood, the girl suggested they have a drink downstairs. Julitan replied that he had never drunk before. In that case, there was nothing to be done. Since she served a young master, she would probably go drink alone. Julitan immediately replied that he could drink. And he wasn't young. She just smiled. After that, they went downstairs. Julitan noticed that his world seemed to be spinning. Carnelian was sure that something else was spinning. Then he noticed that Carnelian was spinning. A second later, it stopped. One sip had done it. Her master was rather weak. Julitan apologized for being weak. He had to find a better night. Carnelian replied that the master couldn't sleep here. A man approached her, noticing such a beauty here. It seemed that the young man was already finished. Her mood changed immediately, and she told him to get lost. What a rude mouth she has. He suggested they go for a walk together. The man would be with her all night. But as soon as he tried to touch her, she immediately grabbed her weapon. He was sure that she was in one of those moods where she wanted to be alone. So let her enjoy her solitude while she could. Nothing changes, whether it's the past or the present. She also noticed how this man was staring at her, but he immediately looked away. Carnelian thought she was being overly sensitive from the alcohol. The man turned to the tavern's pride and joy, namely the elf Merquint. She immediately noticed that he was an elf bought from the slave market. But this elf played wonderfully. However, the main character felt that the song was too sad. That was natural. She also had to tell the master one more fact. Elves in the hands of humans can only sing sad songs. Reisenberg Castle. Lee Dietrich and Iketis bowed. The girl asked if they had been summoned. The king replied that there would soon be a ball. Many important people would be arriving. Lee Dietrich would ensure their safety. However, he suggested that she change her clothes and meet the other nobles. She was so young. It was wonderful that she worked so hard, but it was also important to meet good people and start a family of her own. But here it was again. She hoped that everything was all right with Sir Julitan. She hadn't even been able to provide a carriage because of the situation. The king asked if she was listening to him. Lee Dietrich immediately replied that she was. His Majesty wanted to know who she had in mind. He could even use his connections to make it happen. Karina wondered if they would invite those who had attacked their country to the ball. Zelid was sure that they were not happy to see them, but they couldn't send them away either. Lady Lee would attack them as soon as she saw them. If he saw her up close, he wouldn't even mind. Morning came, his head hurt. What was the point of drinking alcohol? He felt like he was dying. A man burst in and shouted at him to stop loafing around. He'd better hurry up and get to work. He shouldn't even think about resting until lunchtime was over. It seemed like it was time to start. While Julitan was cooking, Merquint entered. The captive elf asked if he could have a glass of water. Julitan replied that of course he could. After that, Merquint finally drank some water. Julitan watched him drink the water with delight. The same village boy who had been looking for Merquint also ran in. Julitan recognized him immediately. The boy also recognized the fake knight. What was he planning to do with Merquint? Julitan replied that he had only given him water. The elf replied that he had indeed only given him a glass of water. The child insisted that this guy was a liar. He was pretending to be a knight. But it wasn't Julitan who was lying. Raspeng began to strike him with a wooden sword, stating that if he harmed Merquint, he would deal with him. Merquint apologized for the misunderstanding. Rasberg swore on his knightly honor that he would protect Merquint. The elf thanked Sir Rasberg. Now it was clear who the boy wanted to protect. In fact, his desire was admirable. After that, the boy ran away because it was time to practice with his sword. He would see Merquint later. Suddenly, he bumped into a man. The elf immediately ran to the child, wanting to make sure he was okay. And then he noticed the same elf from yesterday. And up close, this elf was even more charming. Raspeng immediately struck the man with his sword, telling him to stop bothering Merquint. This made the man even angrier, and he pushed the boy away. This kid was clearly out of his mind. Merquint immediately ran to Sir Raspeng. However, the boy managed to get up and raised his weapon. If he even touches Merquint, Rasberg will kill him. This brat probably doesn't even know who he is. He called himself the Nightmare of Zelid, known as the one who cuts children down with his breath. He would cut off this brat's hand so he could never hold a sword again. Julitan immediately told the imposter to stop. He even had the audacity to pretend to be Zelid. He immediately turned around when he heard himself called a liar. He really is a liar. When Zelid drew his devilish sword and blessed him, Julitan was standing right in front of him. It's not even a complete lie. However, he didn't even believe that this guy had been in the war. He looks like a third-rate cook, so he's lying. He immediately said that he was not a third-rate cook. He is the wandering knight Julitan who saved Bellissima. The man asked if he was really a knight. Julitan wondered if it had worked. He just laughed. He couldn't understand how such a frail boy could be a knight. Julitan realized that it hadn't worked. If it was true, he even wanted to test the skills of the famous wandering knight for himself. Suddenly, 2 more people fell from the 2nd floor, landing right on top of the man. Then Carnelian jumped down there. The man immediately asked who she was. Carnelian called herself the Sille of the first-class wandering knight who saved Bellissima. This insolent worm will pay for his disrespect. Who would have thought that this kid was really a knight? However, his moment of realization came too late. Carnelian killed him. Merquint covered Rasburga's eyes and turned away himself. Carnelian asked if he hadn't said himself that they would hide their identities. Julitan asked her what had happened. Had she been attacked too? It was obvious that they were slave traders. A similar tavern owner had betrayed Carnelian and Julitan as well. Rasburg turned to the knight, saying that thanks to the two of them, they were alive. He didn't even realize that Julitan was a real knight. The young man immediately wanted to confess the truth, but Carnelian stepped on his foot. She explained to the knight that there was no point in hiding any longer. He looked at the knight with admiration. Merquint also smiled as he watched the situation unfold. Julitan and Carnelian were already about to leave. However, the beaten owner came out to wish them a safe journey. He then immediately ran back inside. Julitan was surprised that he was still alive. Perhaps even Carnelian could change. But the girl replied that no, she had truly intended to kill him last night. In exchange for the man freeing Merquint, she had spared his life. Now free, the elf thanked them from the bottom of his heart. He was free. Julitan was happy for the elf and asked if he would now go home. Unfortunately, his home had been completely burned down, and Merquint had been captured. The elves were scattered across the continent as well. Julitan noticed that this elf had nowhere to go, so he offered him to join them. Merquint's face immediately lit up at this suggestion. The elf asked if it was really possible. Of course it was. This knight was so weak that it was better to have an elf with him. Julitan replied that they had no destination, so he suggested they travel together until they found a place to stay. Merquint thanked them for the opportunity. However, he had things to take care of before leaving, so he asked if they could wait. Julitan and Carnelian nodded. A little later, he returned and thanked them for waiting. Now they could all set off. Meanwhile, the child was looking everywhere for Merquint. He asked the elf to answer if he could hear him. With tears in his eyes, he remembered the moments he had spent with the elf near the felled tree. However, now there was no one there. Raspang approached the spot and saw a wooden sword lying there with a note. As soon as he picked up the note, he saw one sentence. "Thanks to you, I haven't lost hope." Merquint thanked Sir Rasburg. Meanwhile, the man did not understand where all his luck had gone. Why was the man he was going to sell a knight? Suddenly, there was an explosion behind him. An unfamiliar man approached him and stepped on his body. It was Seed with two seals, Justin and Juliet. He was looking, of course, for the seal with red eyes. Carnelian noticed that at this rate, the ball would be over by the time they got there. How could he be so weak? Juliet replied that he was going as fast as he could, and Merquint is even stronger than he seems. Compared to other male elves, he is stronger. As soon as they heard his words, they immediately understood that it was all a misunderstanding. It turned out that he was a guy. People constantly mistook him for a girl because of his body. Julitan thought that he looked like a girl from every angle, from head to toe. His body used to be different. When he was first sold as a fish, he looked like any other elf boy. But the problem was that the master's wife fell in love with him. He tried not to give the wrong impression, but rumors began to spread that they were having an affair. In a fit of rage, the master castrated Merquint, and now he looks like this. Carnelian just nodded. Julitan apparently didn't even know what castration meant. Although his body was feminine, he would do everything he could to help. Carnelian replied that he didn't need to worry. The most feminine person here was her master. Julitan whispered, asking what castrated meant. She decided to explain it using apples as an example. Julitan was immediately frightened by this explanation. Merquint saw that the castle of Reisenberg was ahead. The girl noticed that Lady Lee looked stunning, just like a real bride. Looking at herself in the mirror, various memories came to her mind. She remembered that very training session with Zelid. Lee Dietrich was angry at him, telling him to stop giving in. She made another lunge, which the man easily dodged. What caused her to suddenly stumble, however, Zelid managed to catch her. Lee Dietrich immediately asked what he was doing. He couldn't let his future bride get hurt. Lee Dietrich immediately took advantage of the opportunity and flipped him over. The girl asked what he was going to do now. Zelid replied that being pinned down by her also had its advantages. This made her blush, and she immediately got off him. Lee Dietrich asked him to stop saying such shameful things. The man said that he would soon return to his hometown. He needed to be informed of the wedding location. Lee Dietrich asked how long he would be gone. Zelid replied that he would return quickly, as his heart was there. The day before the wedding, the woman asked if they had practiced well today. She must have been nervous about tomorrow's wedding. Lee Dietrich asked about Zelid. The maid replied that he would arrive soon. He said he would return immediately. The girl hoped that nothing had happened to him. She shouldn't worry. The maid had prepared her wedding dress, which was in her room. Lee Dietrich thanked her for that. After that, she went to her room and saw the wedding dress that had been mentioned. She immediately looked around to see if anyone was coming. As soon as she realized that no one was there, she quickly closed the door behind her. She went to the mirror and even started trying on the wedding dress. Suddenly, a pearl fell off the dress and rolled toward the open door. At that moment, Iketes walked in. Lee Dietrich asked what had happened. The Sille replied that the news concerned Sir Zelid. Sir Zelid had killed his entire family and disappeared without a trace. Because of this news, the dress fell from her hands. In the reflection, Lee Dietrich saw a vision of her past self, who should have been wearing a wedding dress at that moment. Lee Dietrich apologized, but she had to go. She thought that everything was in the past. Therefore, it was not worth thinking about it. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice that Lady Lee recognized. It was Sir Julitan and Carnelian, whom she knew well. Lee Dietrich was glad they had come. She also greeted them in Reisenberg. The girl was even surprised that they had company. Julitan introduced Merquint. Merquint explained that he was Sir Julitan's lowest elf. He was infinitely grateful to this guy for taking him under his wing. Julitan replied that this was not the case. The young man had not taken him under his wing. Merquint was a dear friend to him. The same could be said of Cornelia. Lee Dietrich noticed that he had good friends. She hoped that their journey would be a good one. Merquint just smiled silently. He was truly happy that his destiny was now beginning to fall into place. Carnelian asked Lady Lee if she was in a hurry. Lee Dietrich replied that she was going to the castle after buying a dress for the ball. The dress must be beautiful. She couldn't even afford a dress because of her own tailor's incompetence. They needed to dress appropriately for the ball. Lee Dietrich said that they should just mention her name when they found the right dress. Carnelian asked if she was sure about her decision. Lee Dietrich replied that they were heroes of Reisenberg. She even asked them to buy it in her name. Carnelian immediately thanked Lady Lee. Suddenly, they heard a familiar voice. It was possible to see the Azure Predator after all, if they went to the ball. It was none other than Zelid with Karina. Carnelian seemed to sense Karina's mood and even wanted to draw her weapon. Lee Dietrich asked how he dared to show his face here. Zelid replied by asking if this was how Reisenberg welcomed its guests, especially the way she was aiming the ball at a guest of the imperial family. Lee Dietrich confirmed that it was Prince Belbran's seal. But why would the first prince do such a thing? Zelid eagerly awaited the ball. Soon they would see each other again. Julitan wondered if it was too extravagant. Merquint approached him. The elf noticed that the gray color suited Julitan very well. Now he could see for himself what it meant to fit perfectly. Merquint thought he was unworthy of wearing something like that. Julitan replied that he looked simply wonderful. Merquint thanked him for his kind words. However, Miss Carnelian was late, and he was right. Julitan shouted for her to hurry up, because they might be late for the ball. Carnelian replied that this was her first ball in 253 years. She couldn't just pick any dress. Finally, she chose a dress. It was a beautiful, form-fitting dress. Julitan also noticed Carnelian. The girl asked if he would finally stop staring at her. The boy immediately apologized. He also looked quite presentable in his suit. Carnelian asked the elf if he was sure everything was okay. Merquint replied that he was. He couldn't make a lady in a beautiful dress carry a sword. Julitan also wanted to carry a sword. Carnelian replied that Merquint might look weak, but the weakest one there was Julitan. Even the elf was sure that Sir Julitan wouldn't last a minute. After that, they entered the castle. It was nothing like the Lord's castle. Your men immediately greeted Julitan. They immediately recognized him as the famous knight. They were flattered by his presence, and the beautiful woman standing next to him was surely his lover. Julitan replied that this was not the case. Carnelian said that she was his seal. The fair-haired man wanted to talk about Prince Lance's help in the war. The other man replied that there was a proper order of things. They should talk about Prince Belbran's help in the war. The light-haired man interrupted him, saying that he was just trying to steal the spotlight. The dark-haired man asked if he was trying to tarnish Prince Belbran's honor. Lee Dietrich shouted for them to stop. What were they doing? They immediately fell silent. Lee Dietrich apologized for their behavior. After that, she wanted to escort these guys out. Carnelian asked Lady Lee what had happened to her dress. Lee Dietrich explained that she wasn't used to wearing dresses. Besides, the atmosphere was unpleasant. When she mentioned this, it was clear that everyone was indeed tense. Everyone had swords. Everyone was tense because of the struggle between the two princes for the throne. Isn't it usually the first prince who inherits it? The first prince, Belbran, has the right to the throne. But the second prince, Lance, is kind by nature and skilled in state affairs. He has many followers. Such an incompetent older brother and a skilled younger brother. Quite a common occurrence. Lee Dietrich asked everyone not to worry about everyday matters and to enjoy the evening. Meanwhile, German arrived at a huge greenhouse. Jamie, who was the seal, came to him. She wanted to ask this important person why he had come here. After all, he was the emperor of this continent. She should at least use his title. Jamia replied that she was not interested in human titles. In any case, she wanted to know if there was any news about Garang. Whatever it cost German, she would get it from him. Besides, there was another interesting thing. Just think, if it wasn't Teshin, then who could have awakened her? The emperor wanted to know from her who her subjugator was. Jamie had to know because she was the mother of all seals. It seemed to him as if the whole world was lying to him. It's difficult to be at a ball with the nobility. It's not for him at all. As soon as he stepped out onto the balcony, he saw that Carnelian was there too. The girl asked what the great knight was doing there. Could he be asking her to dance? Julitan immediately replied that he wasn't. He also wanted to know what she was doing there. The young man thought she was looking for the right knight who would give her riches and power. Carnelian replied that it was all because of him. Seals could only attend the ball after dancing with their superior. She had even thought that he had forgotten about her. But Julitan had no idea about this. In that case, it seemed that he would have to dance with her. But Julitan had never danced before. What an incompetent master. She would have to teach him how to dance. She was too close. He could even feel her breath. Carnelian asked Merquint if he could sing for them. The elf nodded. After that, they were swept into a dance to Merquint's singing. They showed Zelid walking down the corridor with something flying towards him. He reacted quickly and saw that it was the very bottle of antidote he had dropped. Zelid asked if she no longer needed the antidote. Lee Dietrich asked what he was doing there. He had come here after the destruction of Reisenberg. He repeated that he wasn't interested in this small country. She should have figured out by now what he was up to. Zelid called her Karina. The girl demanded that he not call her that. She was a knight of Reisenberg, named Lee. Why the hell did he call her by her old name? Zelid asked how long she intended to serve these stupid people like a loyal dog. Lee Dietrich replied that he should stop mocking the nobility. Zelid asked what would happen if her nobles endangered the kingdom. Lee Dietrich replied that not everyone wanted to destroy their kingdom, unlike him. After that, the girl walked past him. Zelid said that she would soon find out. Meanwhile, they had already finished their dance. Carnelian replied that it wasn't bad for a first time. Julitan said that now she could participate in the ball. The girl just laughed. Did he really think such a rule existed? How gullible he was. It turned out she had lied to him. He'd better pull himself together, because soon he would have to appear before the king. If he looked like a fool, he would be disgraced. They were interrupted by a man who was looking for Sir Julitan. As it turned out, His Majesty wished to see the knight. Carnelian suggested that the knight go with him. After that, they came to the king. Many people noticed the knight. It seemed that he had defeated the nightmare with a single blow. The king was surprised that this was Sir Julitan. He had heard of the knight's deeds for the kingdom of Reisenberg. Julitan replied that he had done almost nothing. Carnelian even scolded him in his mind, because he was not talking to just any old man. The king was informed that he was a wandering knight. Therefore, he offered him to become a royal knight of Reisenberg. What a lucrative offer. He would receive a mansion, a title, and wealth. Enough to last him a lifetime if he became a royal knight. Carnelian couldn't understand why he was hesitating. He should accept the offer quickly. However, Julitan refused. The title of royal knight was too much for him. This kid is clearly out of his mind. He turned down the best offer he could ever get. What a modest young man. Reisenberg would flourish with a knight like him. Another person interrupted their conversation. It wasn't his place to say, but what Reisenberg really needed wasn't a knight. It needed a strong royal lineage. They need to choose a crown prince as soon as possible to stabilize the kingdom's prosperity. The king clearly did not like this idea. The man confirmed that His Highness the Prince was right. They must hurry and choose a gracious prince to support the country. The king told everyone to be quiet. They actually dared to fight for power in front of the guests. Had they really abandoned their honor and been blinded by greed? He was going to announce it sooner or later anyway. But now he would announce it right away. Let them listen carefully to his speech. Namely, who will become the crown prince of Reisenberg. It will be Prince Lance. He fell to his knees before his father and begged him to reconsider. After all, he was needed in Reisenberg. The king couldn't believe how much this insolent man wanted the crown. Did he really think that the king didn't know about the murder of his rivals and the secret buildup of an army? If he were on the throne, his greed would destroy Reisenberg. The king ordered him to leave. He did not want to see his son's face. Did he not hear what the king said? However, the prince was completely beside himself. How dare this decrepit old man give him orders? His motives were clear. He wanted to kill his own father. Lee Dietrich immediately rushed to protect the king, but it was too late. The blood-stained royal crown fell right at her feet. Lee Dietrich was too late. The king was dead. The prince asked if a royal knight could ever raise a sword against the king. She must not give anyone reason to doubt her loyalty to the royal family. He ordered the new king of Reisenberg to lock the castle. The man would kill anyone who opposed his coronation. The guards rushed in immediately. They surrounded the new king. Then Zelid entered. So he is also involved in this affair. The new king turned to Julitan and said that if he served him, he would give him unheard of riches and power. Julitan did not understand how he could kill his own father. He really is an idiot for not knowing his place. The new king ordered Lady Lee to kill him first. Of course, his Sille came to his master's defense. This guy is her subordinate, so she won't forgive those who harm him. The man asked how the Sille dared to threaten the royal family. Carnelian explained that this was no mere threat. If he so much as touched Julitan, he would die. The man did not understand why Lady Li allowed the royal family to be insulted. She should deal with them quickly. Sille pondered what she would do now. The principles that underlie a knight. What are they worth anyway? She threw down her sword and turned to Prince Belberin. Lee Dietrich renounces her title of knight and all her merits. The man asked how she dared to surrender Reisenberg. She would not surrender it. Lee Dietrich would no longer obey the king's orders. She would defend Reisenberg of her own free will. Belberin asked how she dared. He then called Lee an enemy of Reisenberg. The king ordered her to be killed along with the seal. But they doubted the wisdom of the new king's decisions. How those worthless cowards tormented him. He then ordered Sir Zelid to kill these bastards. But it was clear from his expression that he had no intention of carrying out this worthless order. Belberin asked if he hadn't made a promise. Zeld promised that he would be present, but this man had no right to tell him what to do. But he decided to turn a blind eye, since Lee had renounced his title of knight. Carnelian asked if it was now possible to finish off this mad prince. Merquint suddenly sensed something. He tried to understand what it was. What was this terrifying aura? He immediately ran out onto the balcony and saw that the city was on fire. Merquint shouted about it to get the others' attention. Lee Dietrich ordered Icades to go into the city and save the people. The girl had no idea what was happening. Another familiar figure entered the room. Carnelian immediately turned her attention back. It was a Stygian cardinal with seals, seed from Lichtegger. Lee Dietrich replied that it was a personal order of knights of the Hesfarkon Empire. They have more power than the kings of many countries. They obey only imperial orders, so why was he here? Sid demanded that the king be brought here. Belberin pushed the main character away, shouting that he was the king of Reisenbrunn. The man explained that Sir Lance was the king, so one of them must be the king. He also noticed the dead body, apparently that of the former king. Belberin began to insist again that he was the king. How problematic this was for him. Using her power, Juliet decided to burn the man. None of those present had clearly expected such a sight. After that, the charred body fell at their feet. Sed approached Lance, saying that this boy was now the king. The man demanded that the red-eyed seal be brought to him. This was the order of the first emperor of Offenburg. Carnelian immediately understood who he was talking about. In the end, the man would find her himself, killing everyone present. People began to beg for mercy. Lee Dietrich told him to stop. She didn't know what orders he had received from the emperor, but she wouldn't let him wreak havoc in Reisenberg. Of course, he knew the azure predator of Reisenberg, Lee. Sed thanked her for coming out. He had always been interested in female knights, as they were rare. They were so beautiful when they screamed. Lee Dietrich tried to block the blows with her weapon, but what was happening? This man was blocking her attacks with his bare hands. She also noticed something on his hands. Sed believed that there was no point in even drawing his sword. His seals also joined the battle. Even with her sword, she was able to cut through fire and ice. Sed was already right in front of her face. Then he grabbed Dietrich by the throat. The man was very curious to hear how the azure predator would scream. His hand was immediately cut off by Zelid. The man told him to get in line since he had business with Lee. Incidentally, Zelid had been waiting for his turn for a long time. After that, he had to draw his weapon. Zelid had heard a lot about the sword of the Stygian cardinal's side. It was more of a magical amplifier than a sword. Sid had also heard about Zelid's nightmare. He was even sure that the rumors about how Zelid had cut off his arm would spread. He surely knew that no one had ever survived more than 5 blows from Seed, so now they would test it. He let out a sound wave. The wave affected everyone present. The stronger Zelid's attack, the more it would hurt him. It seemed like he had some kind of resistance to magic. Zelid immediately approached him, saying that this man was talking too much. Justin used the power of ice. Together with her master, Karina also attacked the seal. Juliet put up a fire shield. In addition to these attacks, Zelid slipped through and attacked his opponent. However, Side also sensed his presence behind her, and then he used his magic attack again. Because of this, the man had to jump away from him. Meanwhile, Juliet and Justin attacked Karina. Sed kindly asked where his boast had gone. Maybe he should attack again. In response, the man simply remained silent. Sid explained that if he blocked his attacks, he would suffer. If he didn't, he would die painlessly. It was up to the nightmare to choose. Zelid repeated that he was talking too much. Lee Dietrich approached him, thinking that he was only interested in her. What was he doing? In response, Zelid asked if she would go with him to the south after he killed the guy. Lee Dietrich couldn't believe he was talking about this right now, but she would think about it. And first they had to deal with this man. After that, Zelid and Lee Dietrich decided to attack together. Meanwhile, Julitan, Carnelian, and Merquint were already running away from the burning castle. She didn't even have time to enjoy her dress. Julitan asked if it was okay for them to run away like that. Carnelian asked him what he suggested they do. The guy really wanted to help them. Carnelian told him to stop feeling sorry for them. They weren't in a position to help. She herself was the seal that Seed was looking for. They had to run as far away as possible. That would be the best help they could give. Everything would be over if the Emperor caught them. Julitan didn't understand why the Emperor was looking for her. Hadn't she been asleep for hundreds of years? It seemed that several hundred years were not enough to escape him. She apologized to the master, as now they would not be able to enjoy the journey. Said was unhappy that they had lost the seal because of the interference. Juliet asked if they should ask for help. However, the man replied that there was no need. Even the most exciting hunts are for those who run in fear. The man reported that Seed had lost the red-eyed seal. He is disgracing the Hesfarkan Empire. That's even good, because that bastard shouldn't be the only one to get all the glory. The seals will seek refuge near Dalekot, as the Emperor's influence there is minimal. He assumes that they will pass through the mountain peak, as a reward has been offered for his head throughout the Empire. Richard's guess was logical. The man ordered special troops to be sent to the mountain peak. It didn't matter how far they went. These guys wouldn't be able to escape him. Julitan stopped to rest a bit, and also to ask where they were going. Since it's an imperial order, the reward for them will be throughout the Empire. We need to cross the border. So she wants to cross the mountains and then the border with Dalekot. First, they had to survive. Julitan asked how long they would have to walk. Carnelian guessed that at their speed it might take a month. He clearly didn't expect it to take so long. Carnelian stopped and asked the master if he knew why it would take a month to get there. A pack of wolves adapts to the slowest member. Julitan asked what she was talking about. Because of this useless master, they would be traveling for a whole month. She could get there in 2 days, and Merquint in a week. Julitan immediately replied that he understood everything, so she should stop shouting. Then he stubbornly walked forward. But then he stopped again. Since the journey would take a month, perhaps they would just make more stops. Julitan really couldn't walk any further. Even Merquint explained that they had been walking since last night without sleep. Why not just rest now? Peak Gore. She wouldn't mind a can of cold beer right now. Julitan heard about the can leech and asked if it was near the can city. She was talking about a method of keeping beer in better condition. In any case, he'd better forget about it. Julitan asked if she wasn't worried. Carnelian asked what exactly she was worried about. She had said that Said was strong. He was damn strong and had a terrible temper. In that case, Julitan wondered if the lady was all right. She couldn't say anything about that. Suddenly, the guy heard something and immediately rushed over to Carnelian. And only then did he realize that he was now hugging the girl. Julitan immediately walked away from her. Merquint noticed that this Ardpoo was frightened by something. Suddenly, orcs appeared before them. An orc addressed the man. Carnelian told the master to stay behind. She wanted to find out what the orc wanted from the man. He spoke in his native language and wanted to know where the animals they were chasing were. The girl asked what kind of attitude that was toward the person being questioned. She said they should speak in a language they understood. The orc wanted to know where the animals were. Carnelian didn't know, and it wasn't even their business. He called the man dirty. These words made her angry. After that, the orc spoke contemptuously of humans. She didn't care that they despised humans. But why the hell is he taking it out on her? She's a seal. How could he even mistake her for a human? This stupid orc can't even tell the difference between a seal and a human. Suddenly, Shio ran over. He was the son of the village elder. He didn't understand what his friends were doing. But he stopped immediately when he saw Carnelian. Shio immediately knelt before her and told her his name. He wanted to know what to call this beautiful woman. Hadn't he come to stop the fight? The boy touched her hand. She immediately pulled her hand away, slightly frightened. The girl asked the master to do something, as this guy was strange. Merquint thought that Carnelian had a soft spot for him. Thanks to the elf, he learned that her name was Carnelian. However, he did not expect to hear about the master. Could this sweet girl have been sold to this poor guy? Julitan replied that he was still there. Shio called him a dirty bastard. How dare he keep such a beauty in slavery? This guy clearly didn't understand anything. Who was keeping whom in slavery here? Sheila asked her not to be sad with her lovely face. If she gave him a chance, he would always give her a smile. Carnelian hit this madman. What is he even talking about? In the end, he saved his friends. Merquint asked if they should stop her. They really should. But how exactly? Burn the village to the ground. Amaryllis, seal it. The damage was considerable. They were right. They couldn't let this continue. They had to drive the orcs away this time. The chief of the rural village, cut and burn ladder. The man asked if he hadn't said himself that they could negotiate with them. The chief must know how many gnats had been eaten by the orcs. The orcs refused to listen to them. They must hire mercenaries and get rid of them. They could try to negotiate with them. And speaking of mercenaries, they are asking for an unrealistic payment for their work. However, the man had heard that there was a solution. They can sell this girl to someone in the city for a decent amount of money. Ladder immediately mentioned that she had been with them for 20 years. And now he was talking about selling the one whom the man considered his daughter. But she had been asleep for 20 years. The Ceres in the village would be safe and fed if he sold her. Shio burst in immediately and asked who was talking about selling Amaryllis. If they touched her with a finger, he would cut them off immediately. Ladder wanted to know what had happened to his face. At first, the guy mentioned that this was an excessive display of affection from a beautiful lady. Carnelian pushed him away and apologized for the intrusion, then gave her name. Julitan noticed that she was smiling as if she hadn't just smashed the guy's face. These were the guests he had met. A simple-looking young man, a beautiful elf, and a lady. Shio's father, Letter, also introduced himself. The guests must have been tired from their journey, so he offered them some tea. They would continue their conversation tomorrow. What a wonderful aroma. She immediately recognized that this tea had been grown in Shulihire, but that city had disappeared 100 years ago. So he didn't understand how she knew about its existence. But she remembered that it was a wonderful place to relax. It had the only hot springs in the southern region. Then the man began to guess that Miss Carnelian was a seal. The girl replied that this was indeed the case. Unlike his son, her father had a keen eye. She was now serving as a Seru Julitan. Shio asked his father what the seal meant, and whether they were any different from slaves. Then the man told him that Lady Carnelian was like their daughter. By the will of fate, they live for their master, who awakens them. He immediately approached her and knelt down, saying that fate itself had brought them together. He would awaken this beautiful lady with his kiss. Carnelian struck the idiot again, saying that she was already awake. Latter apologized. He may not seem like it, but this guy has a good heart. Shio wanted to know what his father had said earlier about selling Amaryllis. Carnelian realized that they were referring to the seal they had been talking about. He wasn't sure if they had seen it, but there were orc camps around the village. Since orcs had no concept of breeding animals, they hunted the gnats that crossed their territory, causing problems for the villagers. Orcs find it difficult to understand the concept of breeding gnats. Some residents wanted to subdue the orcs for stealing their property and rashly hired mercenaries. They could have solved the problem with the orcs somehow. But the mercenaries who are already in the village want a large payment and are putting them in a difficult position. This led to talk of selling the seal, but he had watched over it for 20 years and simply couldn't do it. Shio replied that if anyone dared to touch Amaryllis, he would not forgive them, even if it was one of the villagers. Carnelian asked if they could see the seal. They were then led to the room where the seal was kept. Shio thought it was super cute. However, she thought it was strange. Even though the seal was asleep, one could feel its presence, but Carnelian felt nothing from it. This meant that she was in a deep sleep. He would definitely wake the pure and fragile Amaryllis himself. Julitan warned that it was better not to judge a book by its cover. When Carnelian was asleep, he also thought she was weak and delicate. Carnelian immediately asked what he had just said. The guy replied that he hadn't said anything. Did he really think that seals were so easy to wake up? Shio replied that this boy, who had been through so much in his life, had managed to wake her up. How dare he look down on her master? He may not be talented, but he was still able to wake up the stunning and wonderful Carnelian. Julitan replied that her words hurt even more. The girl told the master not to get involved. Shio was mocking him for being weak. It was disappointing that he wasn't a knight, but he was laughing because he was weak. And what's wrong with being a cook? Suddenly he heard the words, "Please tell me your name." Julitan asked why he was asking again. He said his name. Had she already forgotten? Merquint replied that it wasn't Miss Carnelian. It was the seal that had just awakened. She asked to be named. Shio was delighted that she had finally awakened. Carnelian couldn't believe her eyes. He thought there must be some misunderstanding. He was a cook and didn't even know how to wield a sword. Carnelian explained that seals couldn't think about anything else when they made a contract. She asked him to give her a name. Julitan had no idea why this was happening again. Shio immediately turned to Amaryllis and asked if she recognized his voice. They had called her every day. Her name was Amaryllis. She couldn't even imagine how he had waited for that moment when she would wake up all this time. However, she noticed the subordinate and asked him to give her a name. Shio immediately replied that it was not the right guy. Did that bastard wake her up to take her away? Julitan immediately replied that he didn't want to wake her up. However, Shio believed that he had become close to him in order to steal from him. He turned to Carnelian and said they had to run. They immediately took off. Merquint thanked him for the tea. She could only watch as Sir Julitan ran away. Julitan had no idea why this was happening again. She tried to cheer up the master. His life was already such a mess. They were being pursued by the first emperor of Offenburg. It would be useful to awaken another seal. But that wasn't what he meant. Carnelian replied that it was a joke. Why not go to a pub? He wanted to get drunk. Carnelian mentioned that he didn't even know how to drink. She also said that pubs exist to sell alcohol. Where would a pub even come from in this farming village? Merkvint could smell a pub in that direction. Carnelian asked if he was talking about the smell of alcohol. The elf replied that he could smell a pub. Carnelian asked if there was a difference. He immediately wanted to check. Our heroine asked the elf how much he knew about seals. Not much. He just knows that they are very powerful and live a long time. Only humans can awaken them. Not only humans can awaken them. This is different from what Merquint heard. Take, for example, that only those who are strong enough for the seal can awaken it. Looking at Julitan's situation, it's clear that strength varies. She was sure that even such a weak master had hidden potential. Julitan entered the room and saw that it was already occupied. They were clearly unfriendly and asked the boy what he wanted there. He just wanted a drink. A woman approached him, apologized, and explained that it wasn't a pub. Julitan asked who they were. They were mercenaries who had come to deal with the orcs. The man became enraged and asked him where he was looking. He should leave. Carnelian asked the master why he wasn't going in. Were there really such beautiful girls in this backwater? And one of them was even an elf. They asked the beauty to come over and pour them a drink. Someone even said he would caress her all night long. Could these be the mercenaries who were supposed to save the village? They didn't understand why the kid was still standing there. All he needed to do was leave his friends here and get out of there. It was clearly not difficult for him. There was no need to worry, because they would take good care of them. Suddenly, Julitan approached him and told him to kill him. The man pointed a dagger at him and asked if he really wanted to die. Why not repeat his words again? Julitan grabbed the dagger and said that if he was so sure, he should go ahead and do it. They clearly did not expect such behavior from him. The man had no idea who this brat was. He was clearly not from the village. Could he be a knight? He talks too much for someone who is about to die. At first, it seemed like he wanted to fight this bastard. But then the man said that today he would just run away from his problems. The others followed his example. After that, Julitan sat down, saying that his whole life had flashed before his eyes. Carnelian didn't understand if he had gone mad. Why did he do that? He had always wanted to do it at least once, to respond to someone who was rude to him. Of course, he was only able to do it because of Carnelian. He had always been protected. Carnelian asked who the master was who protected the seal. This guy was too strange. The woman thanked him. She had been having problems with these mercenaries. Earlier, he had mentioned the pub. The table was already set, so she suggested they have a drink. Carnelian even decided to feed the master. After that, they all decided to have a drink. It was time to head to Dalicot. Suddenly, he saw Carnelian wearing the same clothes she had on at the very beginning, and didn't understand why she was wearing them again. Then she asked him to give her a name. Had everything gone back to the beginning? He asked her to stop joking. However, she still asked him to tell her her name. Because of these endless words, he finally woke up. As soon as he said it was a dream, he suddenly noticed Amaryllis standing next to him. She asked him to give her a name. She pursued him with the request to give her a name, even while he was eating. Julitan kept running away from her. On the one hand, the girl asked him to give her a name. On the other hand, Sille was chasing him away from Amaryllis. Julitan asked him to stop her. She was still looking for the boy, and he was hiding, watching her. Carnelian even joked that he should tell her he was there. She had scared him. The girl asked if he was really hiding from her. Julitan replied that it was true. On one hand, she asked him to tell her his name. On the other hand, Sille was glaring at him and threatening him to stay away from Amaryllis. In short, he didn't know what to do. She would feel sorry for Sille, but everything would be resolved if he gave her his name. It could be dangerous if the awakened seal didn't fulfill the contract, but Carnelian had become weak because of him. He didn't want to make another seal worthless. Suddenly, Carnelian hugged him. Just because a seal has a strong master doesn't make it happier. Of course, if they meet a weak master, they will probably be useless. That's why he would run away from her. Julitan immediately carried out his words. However, the master doesn't know that she clearly won't be useless. They called Shizo Peak, the leader of the mountain mercenaries, because of a problem in this small village. What pathetic bastards. However, the man claimed that this kid was unusual. There is no one stronger than Shizo at the peak of the mountains. It will be quick, since it's just one kid. They can also rob the villagers while they're there. Suddenly, he noticed Amaryllis, not understanding who this girl was. The man had never seen her before. In any case, it didn't matter. With such a pretty face, he was sure they would make a lot of money. Shizo ordered his men to take her away. Amaryllis was looking for Julitan as usual, and didn't even notice the other people approaching. The man said she would die if she made a sound. It would be better for her not to resist and go with them willingly. She simply ignored them and wanted to go back. The guys didn't understand if she was okay. It would probably be easier to carry her. They knocked Amaryllis unconscious. This girl clearly has problems. That's even better. Girls like that are easy to sell. They even decided to check if she was fresh. She could only watch them silently. Carnelian asked how long he planned to run away. Julitan asked her to be quiet. The seal might be nearby. Sille immediately ran over, shouting. He wanted to know where the guy had hidden Amaryllis. Julitan asked why he would do that. Then why couldn't Sille find her anywhere? Julitan replied that he could think whatever he wanted, but he would be wrong either way. He had been hiding from her all day. Sille racked his brains trying to figure out where she could have gone. Carnelian told Sille that if the seal had chosen the master, it wouldn't listen to anyone. Even if he found Amaryllis, she wouldn't listen to him. Sille didn't even know what a seal was or what would happen to Amaryllis. But he knew one thing. He would give everything to the person he loved, even if it hurt him. How annoying. He will give everything in his own way. It turns out that in this world, there may be someone even more annoying than her master. He knows nothing about seals. Julitan suggested going to look for Amaryllis. Wasn't the master hiding from her all day? He knows it himself, but they still have to help find her. Shio is very worried. Carnelian asked what they would do when they found her. Of course, he decided to leave her with Shio and run away again. Merkvint asked if hide and seek was really over. Hide and seek was indeed over. It seemed she had forgotten that her master was also a fool. Shio noticed many footprints and ran after them. There he spotted the same gang. Shizo thought it wasn't interesting when they didn't put up a fight. Suddenly, he saw one of his men being defeated. Shio demanded that those bastards stop. Shizo asked who he was. The man replied that he was the son of the village chief. Shizo asked him not to say that he was the one who had tried to kill them. The man replied that it was someone else. Since he was the son of the village chief, whom they were trying to exploit, there was nothing they could do. He ordered his men to show this guy why he shouldn't mess with the great Shizo. The man began to say that even if he was the village headman's son, it didn't change anything. However, Shio decided not to listen to him, and immediately attacked. He hit his opponent on the head. Shizo shouted that he was a stupid bastard. Then he asked his subordinates what they were doing. They should have already grabbed him. Shio managed to dodge the man's blow and then hit him from behind. A new opponent also attacked him from behind. Shio reacted quickly and hit him. He couldn't believe that this bastard had defeated every one of these idiots. How could they not even handle one puny little guy? Shio attacked him, shouting for him to get away from Amaryllis. Could this be his girlfriend? Shizo immediately began blocking the brat's attack. What kind of wooden sword is that? Shio replied that orc wood was heavier than a normal sword. Thanks to that, he was able to break Shizo's iron sword. The man tried to stop him. Does he really want to hit an unarmed man? Shio didn't want to hear anything from his filthy mouth. They were just shameless, dirty bastards. How dare they do such dirty things to a weak child? He would never forgive them for this. At that moment, he was stabbed. Shizo told his subordinate to give him the ball. He wanted to deal with this damn bastard himself. That fucking brat needed to know his place. He felt excruciating pain. After that, Shio fell to the ground. The man asked if everything would be okay. If they wanted to ask for a ransom, they had to keep him alive. If they refused to pay, they would simply kill all the residents. If anyone blocked Shizo's path from the mountain peak, they would not survive. He shouted at his stupid subordinates to stop pretending to be dead and get up. What useless idiots they were. It was surprising that this kid was still moving. His gaze was fixed on Amaryllis. Shizo grabbed him by the hair, finding him ridiculous. He was apparently trying to look cool in front of his girl, even in the face of death. Why didn't he look at what was happening to his beloved? Shio realized he had no strength left. He was very sorry that he couldn't save her. He could even hear her finally speaking to him. Shio always imagined how she would look at him and talk to him. He apologized to Amaryllis, because even now he couldn't see or hear her. Julitan, Carnelian, and Merquint arrived. Julitan shouted for them to stop. Merquint noticed that Shio was seriously injured. What had they done to him? The man informed the leader that this was the very man who had tried to kill them yesterday. Shizo was angry, wondering how they could have been afraid of such a weakling. Shizo demanded that they bring him the head of this brat. But they must not harm the girl or the elf. With a single movement, Carnelian was able to get rid of these guys. They watched in horror as their people died. Carnelian had no plans to help Shio, but they seemed to deserve death. Shizo didn't understand what kind of monster this was. The man asked the leader what to do. Of course, they had to run now. These bastards really think they can escape. Suddenly, she heard Julitan's cry, begging Shio to wake up. Merquint felt his pulse weakening. Carnelian understood what the master was feeling. But they had struck him many times in the chest. He wouldn't survive. His heart is still beating. He's still alive. Julitan begged her to use her magic. He asked if there was any way to save him. All she knows is killing and destruction. She can't save anyone. Carnelian apologized to the crying master. Julitan kept begging Shio to wake up. He can't die like this. He has to open his eyes. It was already too late. And just as Julitan's hope faded, he noticed that she had placed her hands on Shio's wound. A green light appeared before his eyes. Amaryllis was healing Shio. Carnelian also noticed that his wound was beginning to heal. Julitan was happy that he was starting to move. Shio didn't understand what had happened. He thought he had been killed. Only then did he see that Amaryllis had saved him. Now she asked Shio to tell her his name. It was simply impossible. How could a master printer have changed so much? Shio was glad that Amaryllis was telling him this. He told her his name. Now he had to give her a name. Her name was Amaryllis. Now Sir Shio would be her superior, and Amaryllis would serve him. He was so happy that he even hugged her. Amaryllis replied that the master's wound might open. Shio replied that the wound was nothing compared to Amaryllis's smile. This young man still uses his banal pickup lines even after nearly crossing the river Styx. Julitan remarked that they looked good together. Merquint replied that they looked happy. Carnelian noticed that this seal had an unusual ability. It healed those on the brink of death. Julitan asked if it was stronger than Carnelian. Let her think about it. She has abilities that allow her to burn someone to ashes. And Amaryllis has the ability to resurrect a person from the ashes, which is more difficult. And it seems that this seal has awakened for the first time. That means it hadn't awakened before. Carnelian was so envious. How happy she would be without her past. Serving several masters in the past wasn't all that great. Julitan asked what she meant. She was talking about being a cook seal, but he was fun. Julitan asked if she was telling the truth. In fact, she enjoyed watching him make a fool of himself. So she was just saying that he was a fool. The man asked the leader if everything was okay with him. Shizo asked if he remembered that girl. However, he had never seen such a terrifying woman before. This idiot doesn't even realize that she's wanted all over Hesfarkon. She's got the red eye mark. They'll get a lot of money if they turn her in. That way, they can get revenge and make some cash. Thanks to her, they could become rich and get their revenge. Julitan didn't understand how to use this information. Shio now wondered if he was really a cook. He was from a fishing village. There was nothing like that there. But this man had told Shio that he was confident in his cooking. Julitan noted that he was second to none when it came to seafood. Shio believed him. Maybe because they were the same age, they clearly enjoyed each other's company. But now is not the time to relax. Amaryllis wanted to ask Miss Carnelian something, specifically why seals are born. It seems she didn't remember the moment she was born. Carnelian replied that it was better that way, as it was better not to remember. And because of the rule, Carnelian couldn't tell her, and she shouldn't worry about such things and just live happily. Her foolish master would grow old and die in time, but she would live with these memories forever. Amaryllis couldn't believe that Sir Shio would die. Carnelian reassured her, saying that it wouldn't be soon, so she'd better not cry. Shio asked what the two beauties were talking about. Amaryllis replied that Sir Shio couldn't die. The boy asked why he had to die. Just as she was about to answer, he suddenly silenced her. Shio would never leave Amaryllis alone. Amaryllis asked if that was really true. Shio replied that she had nothing to worry about. Julitan shouted for Shio to come and help. Shio asked Amaryllis if she wanted to see Julitan ruin the cooking. She finally realized that everything would be fine if she relaxed from time to time. Suddenly, Letter entered the room. Shio noticed that something was wrong with his father, so he wanted to find out what was going on. He looked worried. The man told him that the village meeting had ended. It seemed that everyone had unanimously decided to subjugate the orcs. Shio didn't understand why they had decided to get involved with a couple of knats. These weren't just any knights. They were afraid that the orcs would come after them next. Orcs don't attack without thinking. They're a smart race. As long as people don't invade their territory, they'll never attack them. He's right about that. But those who are afraid of dying want to attack, instead of trying to understand their enemy. What nonsense. Letter said that those who are afraid hold weapons, and those who are brave extend their hands. Someday he will understand this. Then, he will be the one to extend his hand. Tomorrow, he will go to the orc village. His father asked him to rest, as he had recently been wounded. There was no need to worry, because now he had a capable seal named Amaryllis. His father just sighed, saying that he understood everything. He would do everything to convince the villagers. Carnelian didn't understand why they had to be at their beck and call. Shio replied that it was because Julitan had agreed. The girl replied to the master that they were not in a position to do so. He knew that himself. But they should at least escort them until Shio returned home safely. You never know when they might get into trouble again. In the end, she agreed with the foolish master. Merquint felt the smell of orcs growing stronger. There he saw his friends and asked how they were doing. Then they arrived at the orc village. Julitan noticed that the orcs here were very aggressive. They were different from the ones in the city. Enslaved races become unmotivated. Merquint was the same. Carnelian replied to the master that he would be the same if he were whipped every time he disobeyed. After that, they entered the shuttle. There sat the village elder of the orcs. She hadn't seen Shio in a long time. The man addressed Richard. Lion Archibald Isengram, Black Cardinal Said von Russell, and Reuter Maximilian. Reuter asked Richard if he knew what people called these three men. The three leaders of Hesfarkon. They had reduced him to the level of those who knew nothing but fighting. Richard replied that his father need not worry. Said had failed to carry out the Emperor's order and was now trying to correct his mistake. If they got the red-eyed seal before Said, they would take away his chance at redemption. And he would be called a failure. Then the Emperor's trust in him would fall. It was easy enough to break trust that was already broken. After that, the man asked if there was any news about the special unit from the peak of the mountains. They learned that the red eyes and the seal were there. They confirm it. Reuter knew it all along. True power comes from information, not swords. And in this, the father is indeed right. It is quite easy to deceive the ignorant. Shio said they had come to discuss important matters. At first, she thought he was talking about his village, but it was about his beloved. Shio asked her to share the blessing of the land with Amaryllis. They clearly weren't expecting to hear that now. She just laughed. This kid hasn't changed a bit. His beloved, who looked like a seal. Shio asked what it meant that she was a seal. It didn't change the fact that they were together. The guy told Amaryllis to kneel down and bow her head before her. It seemed like Shio had called her Amaryllis. After that, she gave her blessing. And then Amaryllis hid behind her master. Now Shio doesn't want to ask for Nodov back. He didn't want to do that. The guy apologized for the villagers' rude behavior. She heard the apology from the man. However, she was now more surprised by the seal behind his back. Although this was the first time she had ever received an apology from a human being. His father had told him that those who tremble hold weapons, but those who are brave extend their hands. Shio just wanted them to live in peace, as they had before. Julitan immediately mentioned that this was not what his father meant by extending a hand. The woman asked if he was the subordinate of that seal. Julitan replied that he was. How interesting. This guy doesn't look strong at all, so she wanted to know how he managed to sign a contract. He wasn't entirely sure about that, but one thing was clear. He was a talentless tamer. In that case, she wanted to know if this guy regretted signing the contract. To be honest, he wasn't sure now. But if he were asked that question in a couple of years, he would say that he didn't regret his choice. It seemed like she liked hearing those words from the master. A man who apologizes to orcs, and a man who tries hard for the sake of the seal. It seemed that she had been naive about people, and she still couldn't understand the essence of owning knives. But that wasn't a reason to stop trying to understand. Shio knew that she was brave too. Suddenly another orc ran up looking for the chief. She asked what had happened. The orc replied that there had been some problems in the human village. The human army had invaded the village. The villagers had been tied up. Shio asked him not to say that they were the same bandits. Shio told the chief that he had to go. Carnelian thought that sounded dangerous, so she asked the master what they should do. Julitan thought they should go to the village too. After that, they immediately ran away. She remembered the man's words. The brave one reaches out his hand. The villagers were surrounded. The man had heard that the red-eyed seal had been established in this village. Therefore, he wanted to know where the seal was. Lion's Head, commander of the special unit. Latter apologized, but he had never seen such a seal. Shizo appeared and told the man not to pretend to be stupid. He had seen the seal with his own 2 eyes. The man repeated that he had never seen such a seal. The Lion's Head could even hear his gears turning. There was only one reason he had come to this desolate village, the red-eyed seal. If they didn't bring that seal to him, this village would disappear today. Latter wanted to say something again, but the man interrupted him, saying that he hated games. He was sure that he would get an answer someday. After he killed the villagers one by one, just one word from the Baron, he didn't have to stain his hands with their blood. He didn't want to die, so he confessed that the seal had gone to the orc village. It was the truth, so he begged for mercy. Shizo asked what to do now. Those words did not sound like a lie. Then they must take them to the orc village. Except for him, he ordered the rest to be killed. The village elder should die proudly first. Suddenly his blade was cut. After that, Carnelian cut him and his entire body. Just then, they saw that it was the very same red-eyed seal they had been searching for. Carnelian complained about how popular she was. The Lion's Head was glad that she had come here on her own. She had saved them from searching. But who said she was alone? The orcs had come with her. He hadn't expected to see so many orcs. A battle began between the humans and the orcs. But the truth was that the humans began to flee because they couldn't do anything. The man also wanted to flee the battlefield. Carnelian wondered if he really thought he could escape from her. Just think, the orcs would be the ones to help the villagers. Shio immediately ran up to his father to see if he was okay. Latter asked his son what was going on. The orcs had heard that the village was in danger and decided to help them. In order for them to come to their aid, they had to be seen. Shio did a good job. The woman thanked Amaryllis for untying her. The man thanked Merquint. However, for some reason, Julitan did not see Carnelian. She chased after the fleeing man to ask if he really thought he could escape her. He tripped over a rock and fell to the ground. Carnelian replied that this man was stupider than she had first thought. This was getting tiresome, so it was best to end it right now. Suddenly, a new enemy appeared and pushed her away from the Lion's Head. The girl didn't understand what this piece of metal was. A knight in huge armor was facing her. However, Carnelian declared that this huge armor was slow. But before she could even strike, the knight was suddenly behind her. She had to block the blow with her weapon, which sent her flying back a little. Carnelian didn't understand why this piece of metal was so fast. The man just smiled and said that they were armored honor killers. Hoplites, reinforced with magic. They die fairly quickly if they leave their bodies. But that's justified, considering that they can be used to kill knights or seals like her. She noticed that she was surrounded by all these knights, who had been strengthened by magicians. She was at a disadvantage, as there were too many of them. 2 knights also approached the orcs and villagers. The orc immediately attacked him. However, the knight was able to cut the orc in half with a single blow. Another was targeting Julitan and Merquint. Meanwhile, Carnelian was still busy with her opponents. She had to be constantly on guard to dodge their attacks. Another one was right behind her, knocking the girl to the ground. However, she did not give up and came up with a new way to get rid of them. Carnelian thought she was going to go mad. Those pieces of metal wouldn't budge. She realized that she needed to take care of the poppies first. Suddenly, she noticed how one of the metal creatures was about to kill a villager, and Julitan was right there. She immediately reacted to the voice of the master, who managed to pull the villager away from the knight's sword. However, only then did he notice what this pile of metal was standing right above him. Carnelian understood that this was very dangerous, so she immediately rushed to defend her master. Another piece of metal appeared in front of her, but she immediately pierced it with her sword. After that, the girl wanted to strike the enemy who was threatening her master. Another knight quickly caught up to prevent her from doing so. She couldn't react properly because it happened too fast. As a result, the knight knocked her to the ground. Meanwhile, the first knight was ready to kill Julitana. Several more knights rushed at her to finish her off. Once again, Carnelian realized that she could not protect her master. At the same time, clouds began to gather. One of the lightning bolts struck the very knight who was standing over Julitan. The same thing happened to the other knights surrounding Carnelian. Julitan and Carnelian watched as they all fell. The girl immediately turned around to see who could possibly use magic of such a level. It started to rain. No one could believe their eyes. Not even the one who had attacked the village. This magic was used by Shio's father, Ladder. The mages and the lion-headed man immediately began to flee the scene. Kino tried to understand what was going on. How could the head of this poor village be a magician, especially one who, with just a wave of his hand, was able to neutralize all of her honor killers? Because of this, the man had lost all his armored honor killers. What on earth would he say to that man when he returned? Suddenly, silhouettes of people appeared before him. He understood that this could be the end for him. Meanwhile, everyone was busy rebuilding. Amaryllis knew it must have been painful. He needed to wait a little longer. However, the orc replied that it didn't hurt. He considered it an honor to have been injured while helping a friend. Carnelian complained about how her whole body ached. If only she could take a warm shower, all her fatigue would disappear. Julitan, as usual, asked what kind of shower she was talking about. Carnelian explained that her body would get wet from the water pouring down like rain. Julitan asked if that was really the case. Carnelian immediately replied that it wasn't. A shower was different from rain. In any case, he should forget about it. It was her fault for living too long. She would never have guessed that the head was a magician, and it seemed that magic was a rarity these days. Shio didn't expect his father to be a magician. Ladder felt sorry that he had hidden this fact from his son. However, the boy replied that there was no need to apologize. After all, they could only win thanks to his father's support. But why hadn't he told him anything? Ladder explained that magic could make difficult things easy. But everything had its price, and for that price, he had lost the most precious thing he had. They wanted to discuss the situation further, but Merquint shouted that something was approaching. An explosion appeared before them. They were able to take cover thanks to Carnelian's sword. The man shouted that the place was right there. As it turned out, it was sealed with his seals. The lion-headed man said that apart from the mage and the red-eyed seal, the rest were just insignificant nobodies. He also asked them to inform the Emperor of his contribution to this matter. Suddenly, Justin froze him. Said guaranteed that he would definitely do so. Then he killed the man right in front of everyone. All the magic present began to tremble, and then they rushed to flee from this terrifying man. Justin performed the same trick and froze them, and then Juliet incinerated them. Ced was delighted that he had finally caught the red-eyed seal. Julitan began to wonder what had happened to Lady Lee if Sade was here. Ced replied that she was pretty boring. However, her screams were simply beautiful. It was quite an exciting sight. Even those words made him angry. Carnelian noticed that he was in poor shape, even considering that. The journey here must have been quite difficult. Ced merely remarked that it seemed like there were too many listeners around. Juliet and Justin wanted to kill all the villagers. Ladder immediately rushed forward to defend them. He managed to raise his shield. It was very destructive magic. Some orcs were burned alive, and people were frozen. However, Ladder's shield still held. Shio couldn't believe his eyes. He immediately rushed forward, bearing his weapon. He wanted to attack Seda to make him stop. However, for Seda, it was not a strong attack. With his weapon, he wanted to kill this guy. However, Amaryllis stood up to defend him. She looked at her master one last time before falling. Carnelian and Julitan watched in shock. Shio begged Amaryllis not to die. He screamed in desperation. Ced reveled in these desperate cries. Julitan could only watch. He remembered all the sacrifices that had come before. He was struck by an unfamiliar feeling. It was the first time. Carnelian could feel the master's emotions directly. Then she rushed straight at Sade. So all his power was worth the life of a single seal. This was the end. However, he reacted immediately when he saw Carnelian lunging at him. Their weapons collided. Ced asked if she had come to die. Carnelian wanted to destroy his sword. Now she decided to prove her words with action. And so it happened. His sword was broken. Then Carnelian wounded him. Ced still did not give up and tried to strike her. However, Carnelian reacted quickly and immediately moved away from him. It seems a little petty. She should have been weakened after the previous battles. He himself had said that she had been surrounded by honor killers since the beginning of the battle. With that seal, she wouldn't even have the strength to stand. So where did she get such strength? Kione turned his attention to Julitan. Now he understood that it was all because of the subjugator. He immediately contacted his two seals. Sille ordered the subjugator of the seal to be killed. Justin and Juliet immediately attacked Julitana. Carnelian turned her attention back. Julitan was now using his body to shield Shio and Amaryllis. Fortunately, a shield appeared around them just in time. This shield appeared thanks to Ladder. As soon as Carnelian took a breath, she felt the influence of Seed's sword again. Could she be worried about her subordinate? The man did not understand where his former spirit had gone. Carnelian shouted for him to shut up. Now that he could breathe, he even decided to open his filthy mouth. This time, he was able to deflect her blow calmly. Even the seal's eyes began to return to normal. The power of the press has certainly diminished. But for his own good, it is not in his interest to prolong this battle. Therefore, he decided to put an end to it now. Sille noticed that the expression on her face was now pleasing to the eye. Carnelian couldn't hear the words of this twisted bastard. But what could she do? Unlike his master, his subordinates seemed rather weak. Sille asked if she knew what was best about seals. Seals cannot disobey a single order from their master. Carnelian asked what he was talking about. Of course, he was talking about how even if he demanded that they give their lives for him, they would not be able to disobey that order. Carnelian did not understand what this madman was planning. Juliet intensified the stream of fire directed at Ladder. At the same time, Justin touched his hand. His hands began to freeze over. Ladder began to vaguely realize what they were trying to do. Were they really going to die together? Juliet created a huge ball of fire. Then she aimed it directly at Justin and Ladder. Ladder, of course, noticed that they were hesitating to attack. He understood what that meant. The connection grew weaker. Sade noticed it too. He immediately kicked Carnelian away from him. After that, the man ordered them to use all their strength to finish it before the enemy recovered. Justin and Juliet had no choice but to obey his order. A huge stream of fire and ice was directed straight at Ladder. Juliet shouted Ladder's name, clearly worried about him. He used his power to resist the enormous force. Butterflies even appeared there. A huge golden light filled the space. Justin and Juliet fell unconscious. Sade just watched them. Ladder realized that these children were humans. The girl hesitated when the boy attacked. If they were seals commanded by a knight of Seed's caliber, they wouldn't have acted that way. The man replied that they had failed. Justin and Juliet were modified seals. Saeed cut open countless seal stomachs. They were really no different from humans. So if humans and seals are no different, isn't it obvious that humans can be turned into seals? Ladder couldn't believe he had done this to children just for that. Side asked if he wasn't interested. Why only seals? Why not other people? Doesn't the red-eyed seal think the same? Carnelian told the madman to shut up. His evil deeds would end here. He had said too much. Saeed would retreat for now. Why not go and hide where no one could find him? Seed immediately ran away. Carnelian shouted for him to stop, but her attention was drawn to how Ladder had fallen. She immediately picked him up and asked if he was okay. Ladder replied that he was fine. He asked her to help the other people instead. Shio mourned the death of Amaryllis. Julitan also stood there with tears in his eyes, not saying a word. A little later, he stood on the slope in front of the village. Memories of that very battle, which had happened only recently, flashed through his mind. Carnelian approached him, wanting to know what he was thinking about so intently. The boy replied that he really wasn't thinking about anything. Carnelian asked the master how he had been able to use resonance before. Julitan, of course, had never heard of resonance, so she realized that it had been an accident. She mentioned that earlier, when he had wanted to kill Seda. It was very awkward and embarrassing, but it was definitely resonance. And that's why she was able to regain some of her strength, for which she thanked him. Subordinates and seals can share their feelings with each other. If the master becomes a knight and can perfectly control resonance, then they can share the same feelings. If it comes to that point, then Carnelian will become his eyes, his sword and his heart, although there is no chance that this will happen. Carnelian entered the house and asked how he was feeling. Ladder replied that he was fine. Sleep had helped him a little. A lot of time had passed since he last used magic. Carnelian asked what he planned to do with the children. Ladder thought about raising them himself. These children look cute when they sleep, of course, but they are capable of destroying a village without batting an eyelid. Everyone has moments when they do the wrong thing. Ladder was no exception. However, Carnelian couldn't even imagine that. Fortunately, he met a good teacher and was able to find his way. It seems like it's time to repay what he received back then. That's disappointing. She wanted to ask him if he wanted to join their group. Their team has no talent for combat. Julitan is talented at cooking, and Merquint at singing. Although he appreciates the offer, he swore to his late wife that he would never use magic. Yesterday, he couldn't do anything about it. For this reason, he didn't tell Shio anything about magic or himself. Now it's clear why the son of a powerful mage is so ignorant. And since he is the head of this village, he wanted to pave the way for the future of this village together with the orcs and these children. If he says so, then she won't force him. However, he wanted to know something else. Ladder noticed that all the soldiers and knights were from the Imperial Army. Could it be that the Emperor himself was pursuing her? If he meant Emperor Hesfarkan, then he was slightly above him. They were talking about the Akolant Empire. The first emperor was Offenbach. If it was Emperor Offenbach's order, then the road through the mountains would be blocked. So they had to go to the Haiti Mountains. His teacher, named Theseus, should be there somewhere. He will find a way to help them. Carnelian asked how they would find one person in the mountains. With this necklace, she must find his teacher. Shio will lead them there. Now Shio would be under their protection. Julitan asked if the boy was sure he could leave the village. Shio was sure because he wanted to see the world and tell Amaryllis what he had seen and heard. Carnelian sighed, realizing that they had another burden to carry. Julitan didn't mind going together. After that, they said goodbye to Ladder. Justin and Juliet stood next to him. Meanwhile, the girl seemed to be running away from someone. It was strange. This path should have been the right one. The Haiti Mountains. Carnelian was unhappy that they had gotten such an unreliable guide. They had already been here before. Merquint also found it strange because he couldn't see anything. Julitan asked what he meant. The elf couldn't see any living creatures. He couldn't hear any animal sounds and didn't notice any insects. It was unnatural. It was as if the mountain itself had fallen silent. Suddenly, it turned back. Carnelian told them to be careful, because something powerful was approaching them. The guys immediately tensed up, because they didn't know what to expect. Suddenly, a girl ran toward them. She immediately bumped into Juliatna. The guy asked who she was. Shio asked if this beautiful lady was really the danger Carnelian had mentioned. And why was Julitan always alone with beautiful women? Perhaps she had made a mistake. The girl asked them to run away from there. The main character asked if someone was chasing her. It was Malik, the guardian spirit of the mountain. As soon as they asked why the guardian spirit was chasing her, she couldn't answer. If she needed help, she had to explain herself first. The girl was genuinely sorry. He walked on, not understanding why she was mocking a girl in distress. In fact, she should be helping when a beautiful lady is in danger. Julitan noticed that this guy no longer considered Carnelian a girl. Carnelian immediately realized her mistake, and as soon as she understood that it was not a mistake, she was relieved. Everyone must be careful. A strong wind blew at them. Then a guard named Malik appeared. He said he was a guardian protecting this place. Julitan asked what a guardian was. Carnelian explained that it was a creature that protected a certain region under contract. In simple terms, it was an evil spirit or something like that. Malik mentioned that he was a guardian, not an evil spirit. Carnelian didn't care who this guardian was. Why was he pursuing this girl? Malik explained that he was protecting this place. He couldn't allow anyone who entered without permission to leave without consequences. And he said again that he was not an evil spirit. Carnelian began to mock him. Could this timid evil spirit be offended? Malik had said he wasn't an evil spirit. He had never seen an evil spirit himself, so why did everyone call him an evil spirit? Carnelian replied that they had many people with whom such misunderstandings arose, so it would be better for him not to be offended about it. They even had a similar situation with this elf. At first, Malik thought it was a woman. However, then Merquint revealed that he was a man. However, it felt as if he was still seduced by this beauty. Now he sees with his own eyes that there are many unhappy people who, like him, are misunderstood. If he understands this, then he'd better leave right now. Malik stood his ground, for he was the guardian of this place and could not allow anyone to leave. Carnelian was angry that he was acting so cool after everything that had happened. Once they stepped inside, they would not be able to leave alive. Carnelian replied that this guy was truly unscrupulous. An evil spirit would be gentler than him. He didn't want to hear himself called an evil spirit anymore. The necklace she had received from Ladder began to sparkle. He muttered something about Certasius. Carnelian heard him mention Theseus. She immediately told him that they had come to meet this man. So why didn't he put away his weapon and take them to him? He would not harm them, but he was not obliged to take them to him. After that, Malik disappeared. Carnelian was angry at the behavior of this evil spirit. He could just wait until she saw him next time. Julitan tried to calm her down. The girl noticed that they were all amazing, especially how they fought Malik. Still, she sighed as soon as she realized that he had managed to avoid that annoying fight. Theseus must be a wonderful person. The girl noted that they themselves looked wonderful. She also thanked them for their help. As it turned out, her name was Iris. She wasn't sure she would see them again. Julitan didn't understand what she meant. In any case, she decided to leave, as her children were waiting for her. Shio was shocked that everything was so confusing and complicated. Julitan replied that he would experience this often while traveling with Carnelian. But it seemed that this girl knew Tesio, so they decided to follow her. Perhaps they would find the village. At such a height, there was nothing that looked like a village. Perhaps there were just a few houses, Shio asked if he was the only one who could see it. Carnelian also wanted to know what he saw there. Only then did they see a huge city before them, whose name was Theseus. The Tower of Theseus. It was a huge tower. In one of the rooms lay an old man with a black beard. This was simply impossible. Carnelian believed that such a large city could not exist here. Julitan asked if this was really the first time she had seen such a place. The problem was not that she was seeing it for the first time. What about the water supply, the harvest, safety? There wasn't even a water source in such places, but they had a river there, and that was strange too. It was almost as if she had entered another world. Everything was very strange. To start with, he suggested finding Tesio. Julitan decided to go and ask around. He approached a passerby and explained that they were in this place for the first time. He wanted to know the name of the city. However, the man had never even thought about it. In that case, Julitan wanted to know if he knew anyone named Theseus. Of course he did. That man was causing trouble for everyone. Julitan asked where he could find him. The man pointed to a huge tower. Julitan thought that the person they were looking for lived at the top of that tower. However, the man then pointed to the basement of the tower. The guys started climbing down the tower. Shio noticed that it was so lively upstairs, but there wasn't a single ant here. Carnelian said again that it was all strange and suspicious. Suddenly, Merquint noticed a man there. Could he be the very same Theseus? Then the man said that he was always nervous. However, he didn't look like he was dreaming of happiness, no matter how you looked at him. Julitan suggested waiting until he woke up. Theseus, Letter's teacher. It doesn't look like this man will wake up anytime soon. Carnelian asked the master if she should try to wake him up. Julitan asked how she planned to do that. She simply decided to toss the thing he was lying on, saying it was time to wake up. Something strange flew out of the room. Now she felt much better. As it turned out, the one who had jumped out was Theseus himself. Merquint decided to check if the old man was okay. However, the elf noticed that the man was still asleep. But how could he not have woken up after all that? Shio began to suspect that this old man was the seal. Carnelian replied that a seal couldn't sleep in such a strange place. Julitan remembered that she herself had slept in the stomach of a fish. Carnelian didn't understand what was wrong with a fish's stomach. Merquint replied that he looked too old to be a seal. Shio noticed that he was very different from Amaryllis. Suddenly he woke up. Shio shouted that the old man had gotten up. Julitan asked if Shio had woken him up. In that case, there was nothing to be done. Shio said his name. The guy mentioned that he was his subordinate. The old man said the guy's name. Meanwhile, the knights were also fleeing from Malak's spirits. The man mentioned that they shouldn't have come here to hunt. The girl replied that they would return alive. Kione Isenram, a border knight, replied that they would both die if Huizen tried to save him. Huizen could escape alone. Huizen, the seal, replied that Lord Isenram had sent him for the safety of the border knight. He must hold on, and then they would get out of this forest. He had to dodge unexpected attacks. Because of this, they both fell. At that very moment, the seal had to draw his sword. Malak introduced himself again as the guardian of this forest. Huizen identified himself as the seal of Kione Isengram. They had lost their way and entered his territory. If Malak would be merciful, they would leave the area immediately. This seal had good manners, unlike the previous ones. However, he could not allow them to live. Shio began to wonder what this old man's name might be. In fact, the guy had never thought about a male name for a seal before. The old man immediately struck the idiot and said his name was Theseus. Who gave this insolent scoundrel the right to change his name? Now it was clear that this old man was not a seal. What a relief! After all, commanding such a seal would be too difficult. He even felt that he had begun to make up his mind. Theseus began to beat this tax collector, not understanding how he dared to treat him that way. Shio begged the old man to stop beating him. Julian turned to Sir Theseus, saying that they had come to him because Letter had told them about him. Letter said that he had studied magic with him. Theseus didn't even remember if he had such a student. Carnelian told the old man to try to remember. However, he didn't want a 1,000-year-old seal to call him old. The girl immediately mentioned that she wasn't that old. He shouldn't make her older than she was. It wasn't as if he had only one student. If they really wanted to discuss it, every living creature in this world was his student. Carnelian had no idea what this old madman was talking about. Theseus asked why they were bothering him. They needed to get to Dalakot, but the road was blocked. Latter said he might have a solution. He had to figure out a way to get to Dalakot. They just had to get out of this tower and then head south, and make sure they don't slip and fall when they leave. Carnelian asked if he really thought they had come all this way because they didn't know that. All the roads to Dalakot are blocked because of Offenbach. Theseus asked why. Because Offenbach is after them. He's not after everyone, only the red-eyed seal. Here's the solution. Instead of the red-eyed seal, she should just call herself the red-eyed person. But that won't even work. They trusted Latter's decision. Why did he send them to this senile old man? Theseus said to just wait a few days. Since his favorite student Lex sent them all here, he would at least try to find a solution. This old man can't even remember the name of his favorite student, who is called Letter. He'll just try to find a solution, so they should leave his room. He needed to be alone to think properly. Carnelian suggested that they leave. They might have to wait here for a long time for his decision. Shiloh wanted to go eat something because he was hungry. However, Julitan asked him to wait. He had one request. Theseus was amazed by such shamelessness. But he asked what now anyway. He had heard that Theseus had taught Ladder to use magic. Perhaps he really had done so. Well, what about Togo? In fact, he would also like to learn from him. The old man asked if it made sense to learn from him. Julitan wanted to become stronger. Theseus asked him what he would do then. The boy wanted to protect the people he cherished. He wanted to be someone who fought alongside others, not someone who was protected. Unfortunately, he had no magical abilities. Even if it wasn't magic, something else would do. Theseus asked if he had any physical problems. Julitan replied that he didn't. Then he would become strong if he worked hard for several decades. He wanted to become strong in one day. They are being pursued by Hesfarkan and cannot stay here any longer. If Julitan could become stronger in a short time, he was willing to do anything. Carnelian did not understand why the master was suddenly doing this. It was impossible to become that strong. He himself understands that he is asking a lot, since he has no talent for either magic or the sword. Julitan is just a simple cook. He came across a seal that was too good to be true and, becoming a subordinate, began to travel the world. But every time they encountered a dangerous situation, he could only stand there and watch helplessly. Fortunately, he managed to make it here. But he felt that at this rate, he would never be able to protect anything. He fully realizes that even if he had to train his entire life, he would never be able to catch up with the knights he has encountered so far. And that is why he is asking Sir Tisio for help. Julitan wanted to become stronger. He asked for help. He's just making excuses. Julitan asked again. The old man told him to come back tomorrow. It's impossible for him to become stronger overnight, but instead, he will give him something. Julitan thanked him for that. Theseus isn't sure about that. This guy will have to risk his life. The girl didn't understand what this crazy man was talking about. He was clearly insane, asking him to risk his life. If he wants to become strong, then he should at least risk his life. Isn't that necessary? In any case, he doesn't have to come if he doesn't want to. However, he was ready. Theseus replied that it depended on the guy whether he wanted to come. Now let them go. His time for sleep was almost up. After that, they left. He just watched them silently. Carnelian thought he was just an ordinary eccentric, most likely even a swindler. How did he even find out about her? She bet he was trying to deceive Julitan. But suddenly they heard a conversation about how those people must be injured. The conversation was about knights. Julitan asked if they had heard someone calling for help. Carnelian suggested they go, as she sensed a familiar presence there. Huizen was asking for help. They needed to take the master to a healer. Huizen recognized her immediately. Carnelian replied that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, then told him her new name. Huizen told her his name too. He hadn't even expected Carnelian to wake up. She had been awakened by the same idiot. The girl noticed that his tamer was not in the best shape. Huizen replied that it was his fault. They had encountered the forest guards. It must be that same evil spirit. She noticed something interesting and asked if he was really his master. Huizen replied that he was. These initials belonged to the knight Hesfarkan. With Huizen's skills, he must have been a high-ranking knight. And if it really was the knight of Hesfarkan, then he must have it too. It was well known that the entire empire was searching for the red-eyed seal. Huizen immediately began to explain that they were not there to arrest her. They had gotten lost while hunting. Huizen asked her to believe his words. She pointed her weapon at him. Carnelian apologized. There was no prey that could help the wounded hunter. But even after these words, the knight's wounds were bandaged while Huizen sat with him. The others waited below. She mentioned that they would meet again, and it really happened. Just think, Miss Iris will be the town healer. Carnelian could only watch her go. If we go back to that moment, Iris immediately ran over there. The girl noticed that the knight's wounds were serious. He needed urgent treatment. Iris asked the two men to help carry the wounded man to her house. She didn't like any of this. Iris thanked them for their help. It would have been bad if they had been late. Shio replied that they had to help. Julitan asked if there was a hotel in the city. The sun was already setting, so they needed a place to stay. As it turned out, there were no hotels in the city. This was surprising, because the town was so large. It was just that strangers never came here. Iris offered to let them stay at her place if they didn't mind. Since it was a clinic, she had spare rooms and beds. Julitan thanked her for that. The children ran in. Iris had told them that they could get hurt if they ran like that. They called her mom. Shio clearly didn't expect her to actually be their mother. The boy asked his mother if they were sick. Iris replied that they were just guests in their home. Shio wondered how old she was when she gave birth. The girl turned to the elf, thinking that this woman was very beautiful, and her eyes were beautiful too. The boy noticed that the girl had red eyes. She must have stayed up late. Besides, she didn't look happy. The child wanted to help her. He pulled her by the hair. Iris immediately said that he shouldn't do that to guests. But his mother had said that people get sick if they worry too much, and he was just trying to help. Iris explained that pulling people's hair was rude. Now he had to apologize for it. The child apologized. Carnelian asked what this little boy would do when he encountered a ferocious beast. Besides, he looked angry. If he pulls his hair like that, he might eat the child alive. In that case, he would simply defeat the monster with his friends. Another child wanted to give him some food. His mother said that people become happy when they eat their fill. It must work the same way with monsters. Then they would be friends once the master was full. Carnelian sighed and explained that even if the beast wasn't hungry, they couldn't be friends with it. Maybe they wouldn't become friends, but it would be easier for the beast. Carnelian told the master that she was going to eat. She had been hungry lately. At night, she had been sleeping with her sword in her arms. Julitan noticed that she had actually fallen asleep, which was a first. She was probably trying to escape from this world. Iris entered the room and asked if he couldn't sleep. There was nothing to do in this town at night. Since he couldn't sleep, she suggested they have a cup of tea together. After that, she found out how they had ended up here. Everything had changed so suddenly that he was confused. Julitan apologized for only talking about himself, but she actually liked it. It made Iris think that she wasn't the only stranger in this world. The guy asked if Miss Iris was like that too. He'd seen these delightful children before. Her children disappear at night. The main character asked what she meant by disappearing. When the town becomes quiet, it feels strange. At times like that, she wonders if she really exists in this world. Julitan didn't quite understand what she was talking about. After all, she already existed in this world, in his opinion. Iris asked how he would explain what it means to exist. No one can prove their existence. One can only believe. The fact that the children will return in the morning and that she exists here is what she must believe. Iris was sure that he couldn't understand her now. But Sir Julitan had to believe in himself. The more complicated the world seemed, the more he had to believe in himself. Carnelian asked if he really wanted to go. The boy was determined. Julitan said he would return strong. Carnelian asked if this idiot really thought it was that easy to become strong. She was against it. If he wanted to go, he could go alone. In that case, they would go. The girl replied that she was going to walk around the entire city, so she would be busy today. Shio tried to calm Julitan down. Today would be a day for the guys. Julitan asked what that meant. After that, they arrived at the tower. The guys were somewhat surprised. Shio asked what he was working on. Theseus replied that it was just a small defense. The guy asked if it wasn't a barrier to protect the tower. The old man replied that it was just decoration. Then Shio thought it must be to strengthen the magic. He said it was just decoration. Why couldn't he understand it the first time? At that time, Shio didn't understand why he was doing it at all. Theseus replied that he felt lonely if he didn't do anything. But he noticed that the guy had really come. Then he got ready. Julitan replied that he was ready. Then we can begin. The old man started looking around, not understanding where he had put everything. He asked the guys to wait a little while. He would find everything soon. Finally, he found what he was looking for and immediately threw it into Julitan's hands. In his hands was a rather interesting and beautiful sword. He decided to pull the sword out of its sheath a little, and suddenly something struck him. The old man immediately shouted that this guy was an idiot and stuck the sword back in its sheath. Theseus explained that he would die if he exposed the sword. Julitan simply couldn't believe these words. What was he talking about? The old man explained that the sword's power was beyond imagination, but in return, it took away the user's life force. If a weakling like Julitan drew the sword, his life force would be drained completely in an instant. The name of this sword is Scimitar Infitar, a divine sword or a demonic sword. He does not plan to name it as such. But like a parasite, the sword craves life force. Theseus asked if he still wanted to draw this sword. He said himself that he wanted to be strong. If he truly has something to protect in his life, he won't be afraid to draw this sword. But in the end, he would lose his life. If he was afraid, he should return the sword. However, Julitan decided to take it. Life is an equal exchange. To gain something, you have to sacrifice something of equal value. This is a fact that remains a fact, no matter how much the world changes. All that the Infitar does is demonstrate this fact in simpler words. She couldn't understand what was going on in the head of her foolish master. What could possibly be good about meeting this old madman? What kind of city was this? It didn't make any sense. There was no way an aqueduct could exist at such a height. She had to check its source. As soon as she ran further, she saw something very interesting. Suddenly Malik attacked her. What is this evil spirit doing here? There appeared someone she didn't expect to see here. This man told Malik to stop. It would be scary if this woman got angry. Carnelian had no idea why he was here. Had she already forgotten his name? It was him, Theseus. However, the master said he was going to meet this old man. Theseus immediately understood that she meant that serious guy from Kione. Right now, that guy was talking to him in the basement of the tower. Or did she mean Tessina, not this child? Carnelian immediately asked how he even knew about him. That was the reaction caused by just one name. If that kid found out, he would be upset. Carnelian immediately attacked him, shouting at him to shut up. Tessios didn't understand why she was angry. The one she should be angry at was definitely not Tessios. She should only be attacking herself. Carnelian or Garang. The names given to her by others were merely attempts to describe her, but they cannot tell the whole story. The girl with crimson eyes. Theseus asked her what she thought her personality was like. Carnelian asked who he was. Shio asked for anything, just not something dangerous. Theseus asked if he thought this was a charity shop. The guy asked again for something nice. He decided to take up charity work. A sword also fell into his hands. Shio thought it was very cool. Shio asked if he could take it out of the sheath. The old man replied that he could. It wouldn't kill him. This sword is made from a unicorn's horn. It's lighter and stronger than most other swords. Shio wondered if that meant the sword would have a cool effect. Of course it does. If you sharpen this sword well, it will cut well. Shio asked if that was all. Theseus asked what else he wanted from the sword. If he didn't need it, he should return it. Shio replied that he would use it. This thief was still unhappy because he had received the weapon for free. We have nothing else to give them, so let them get out of here. Julitan thanked Sir Tezio. The old man told him to forget about it and finally leave. He was going to take a nap. Those damn kids even broke his bed. They have no idea how expensive it is. Shio immediately hurried them along, and Juliet wanted to leave. Besides, it wasn't them. Towards evening, he finally woke up. Huizen was glad. Kione asked where they were. Huizen managed to find the town nearby. Huizen asked the master how he was feeling. Kione replied that he was even feeling great, but the boy still couldn't understand how they had survived. Perhaps the master remembered the guard named Malak. He nodded in response. Kione remembered him. He was clearly stronger, but suddenly disappeared. Thanks to that, they managed to escape. Kione apologized, because his inexperience had almost cost the seal its life. That's not true. The reason General Eisenram sent Hossein to him was because he could help. It was entirely his fault that he couldn't protect the master properly. Kione thanked him for that. Hossein believed it would be best to leave this place as soon as possible. Kione asked him why he thought so. Was this place really dangerous? Just as he was about to explain, Carnelian entered. Having heard that he had woken up, Hossein was sure that Miss Carnelian was talking about leaving. There was nothing to see, so she hurried back. Kione seemed to immediately understand who she was. It was because of her red eyes. This was the very same red-eyed seal that the Imperial Palace was searching for. The Imperial Palace must be looking for a seal with red eyes. But how could they mistake a weak girl like Carnelian for the seal just because they had similar eye color? She felt so sad about it. This was clearly not what he had expected. If this is really the case, then Kione must apologize. It cannot be that the evil criminal who defeated Marquis Seda and forced him to flee is as beautiful as she is. And if she were a red-eyed seal, she would never have stayed in such a place. After all, Hesfar Khan's army had surrounded the entire mountain. That was indeed the case, so she asked him not to address her that way. He apologized again, then gave his name. Kione apologized for the late introduction. Carnelian also gave her name. Hossein explained that this girl had helped them. Kione apologized again for his rude behavior, and also thanked her for her help. She heard more voices, so she decided to go. At first, she called Julitan her master, but then she corrected herself and called him her companion. They must have already returned. What a beautiful woman. How was it possible that he could have met such a beauty in such a forest? And he had no idea that no matter how beautiful she was, even the seals feared her. Seda's estate. They reported that he was in a state of magical exhaustion. The doctor did everything he could, so he needs some rest. She must be happy to see him in such a state. Everdeen, Seda's older brother's wife, she would never treat him kindly. Her former husband, as well as his older brother Oscar, had always feared that he would become stronger. And that is why he challenged Seda to a duel, unable to overcome this fear. Isn't that ridiculous? If he had overcome his fear, he would have survived. There is no emotion on her face. The last emotion she showed was when Seda's sword pierced Oscar's heart. Now they're not so different. How ridiculous. Seda asked for a razor because he needed to shave. She left his room, nodded, and then another man entered. It was Leoford von Masakyu, a second-rank light hunter. He had come to see if everything was all right with Sir Sade. He was really the only one who would come to Sede's house. Leofrod had heard that it was a serious injury. The Imperial family would obviously be saddened if it was just a serious wound. After all, they want him dead so that Leofrod can take his place. However, he was not interested in titles. He was glad that Sir Sede had returned. Leofrod was worried. Did he come here just for this? He was probably just laughing rather than worrying. He would never do that. If Sir Sade was all right, he could stay and entertain him. Sade replied that if he was finished, he should leave immediately. Carnelian came down to them. She addressed the Julitan by name, glad that he had returned. Shio thought she must have gone mad. Julitan didn't understand what she meant. This girl clearly frightened him. Carnelian whispered that they had a situation where she was his lover, not his Sille. If he couldn't behave himself, someone in this house would die, so he'd better be serious. With a smile on her face, she asked Julitan if he understood everything. The guy replied that he did. Now it was Shio's turn. He had to run to Merquint and tell him about the situation. If someone made a mistake, someone would die because of Shio. She would hold him responsible. Shio immediately rushed off, shouting that he would do everything. Her attention was drawn to the weapon the guy was carrying. The main character explained that Sir Theseus had given it to him. Then it must be something valuable. She was very curious, so why not talk about it honestly and openly? He nodded. Carnelian asked him to stop pretending to be a dumb hero. Why did he even take that scary sword? Julitan asked her to listen to him. Was he really going to say that he would just die for her or something? He'd better not say anything stupid, like that he wanted to protect the seal. And why was that idiotic? He wasn't good enough for her, either in status or skill. That's why he didn't want to be an even bigger burden than he already was. And why is he resorting to this? He could just become strong enough to hand her over to a real knight. Julitan apologized, but he has no intention of keeping his promise. At first, he thought that everything would be resolved if he could pass her on to someone else. Julitan never thought about becoming the master of the seal. At the time, it was too heavy a burden for him. Now things were different, and he didn't want to give it to anyone else. After all, he had promised Carnelian. The guy had said he would take care of her wounds and make sure she didn't feel any pain. He would do everything he could to make her happy, even if only a little. Julitan asked her to trust him, although Carnelian already knows she can't be happy. But he keeps making her dream about useless things. Kione came downstairs. He caught them in an embrace. In fact, it sounded to him like someone was arguing. It seemed he had been mistaken. As soon as Carnelian heard his voice, she immediately pushed Julitan away. Julitan flew into the wall, leaving a mark behind him. The girl immediately rushed over to him and asked if he was okay. Julitan replied that now she didn't even treat him like her master. Carnelian hit this idiot. She didn't like calling him master when other people were around. She would only call him that when they were alone. Kimin had no idea what games they were playing. Julitan even wanted to explain what had happened. However, Carnelian made it clear with her eyes that he shouldn't try to explain it. Julitan replied that it was his secret hobby. He apologized for the long introduction and then gave his name. Kimin introduced himself as well. Now he had a strange hobby too. Carnelian replied that Julitan had saved his life, so he shouldn't worry about it. In the distance, they saw Shio lying down. He was talking to Amaryllis, saying that she was thinking of following them to Dalekot. He wasn't sure what would happen, but he would go through many trials and return to her as the best version of himself. Carnelian asked what he was muttering to himself. Shio immediately jumped away from them. How that girl had scared him. He had been in such a good mood, and she had ruined it. Carnelian told him not to be shy. She also asked if he had found Merquint. Shio replied that he had looked everywhere but couldn't find him. The girl asked if he had left with the children. Julitan noticed that the children were there. They were walking with their mother. Iris was glad to see them all there. Julitan asked if she had been looking for them. Malik would be returning to the city soon. It was time for them to disappear. The boy asked what she was talking about. She was talking about herself, about the children, and about this city. Iris felt sorry, but she didn't think she would have time to prepare dinner for them. She meant that Malik and his henchmen were on their way here, and as soon as they entered the city, he would disappear. All of that is correct. Kimain wondered if they were talking about the same guard who had tried to kill them. Hoisin nodded. But why is he trying to attack the city? In any case, she was sorry that tea was all she could offer them. Now is not the time for tea. They need to run. Iris asked Sir Julitan if the forest was on fire. How could the trees escape? Even if they shouted and brought water, the trees couldn't escape the fire right in front of them. Obviously, trees cannot move. The moment a seed sprouts, the death of a tree is predetermined. Although neither the exact method nor the time can be determined. It is inevitable, both for trees and for people. In other words, she means that she will not even try to avoid it. Iris also does not want to accept such a fate. But the desire to preserve eternity is greed. Julitan asked how that was greed. One must at least try to fight it. Carnelian remembered those very words when he said he didn't want to give it up. She could only remain silent with a sad expression on her face. Of course, struggle is also part of life, but acceptance is also part of it. She existed in this world and was truly happy. It seems Malak is already here. The boy immediately ran outside. Then he saw that the city was indeed completely gone. Malak asked if he really intended to draw the sword. Julitan asked why he was doing this. Malak was simply following a predetermined path. But he decided to ask his question again, namely whether this guy was going to draw his sword. Iris approached him and stopped him. Julitan asked if she really wanted him to just stand there and watch her die. He wouldn't let that happen. Carnelian explained to him that nothing would change even if he drew his sword. He didn't expect her to think that way either. Iris confessed that this city was an illusion created by Certesius. Julitan asked what she was trying to say. The girl was talking about an illusion. Everything here, including herself, was an illusion. However, the guy still didn't understand, or rather, he didn't want to believe it. It was quite simple. Illusion was illusion. Reality was reality. Everything returned to its place. She was certain that Julitan had been dreaming. Just as illusions can influence their lives, even though they are illusions, they will remain in his life even after they disappear. A boy ran up to Carnelian and asked her to make his older sister better. The girl reassured him, saying that she often gets sick. After that, the child returned to his mother. They were happy to have met such wonderful people. It was fun. Kione would never forget how she had saved him. Huizhen also paid her respect with a nod. Carnelian thanked Iris. Now it was time for them to leave. With Malika's power, the house began to evaporate. In its place, a huge tree appeared, and now they were gone. Theseus and Merquint came to them. The old man replied that there was no need to be depressed. Carnelian and Shio pushed the old man aside as soon as they saw Merquint. They wanted to know where the elf they had been searching for was. Merquint apologized, as he needed to ask Certesius something. These brats didn't even want to listen to him. He was here for Togo, to bestow upon them his priceless wisdom. We need to start from the beginning. This city is a reminder of the burned forest, and Iris was one of the largest trees in that forest. It must have been difficult for her to live in human form. He remembered Iris's words that she wasn't the only stranger in this world. When he first arrived here, there was only a scorched forest, and Malak who roamed the forest. Certesius gathered his memories of the forest to create a fantastic city. Theseus asked them what their impressions were now. In the end, he let him disappear anyway. What did he matter then? Theseus then asked why he had tried to stop Malak. He knew he couldn't stop him, so there was no point in stopping Malaka. They act according to their beliefs, even though the result will not change. He remembered how Iris had asked Sir Julitan to believe in himself. The more complicated the world seems, the more he must believe in himself. But it couldn't be said that nothing had changed. They would all remember Iris. So Iris had definitely existed. Some things can only be changed by faith. He was sure that listening to an old man was too boring, so Theseus decided to leave. And he almost forgot what he wanted to do. With a single flick of his finger, he was able to change Carnelian's eye color to blue. Merquint and Shio also noticed the change. For a while, she wouldn't have to worry about her red eyes. But if she lost her composure, they would return immediately. So she had better be careful. Carnelian asked what he meant by losing her composure. That old fool had deliberately emphasized that point. He wished her luck in this god-forsaken and forgotten world. After that, there was no trace of the old man. Kione noted that too much had happened in one day, and he was absolutely right. However, the man was still glad that she would no longer be misunderstood because of the color of her eyes. Now she could truly descend from the mountain without fear. Huizhen suggested that the master leave, as his highness must be worried about him. Kione would eagerly await their next meeting. Carnelian approached her beloved, saying that it had been a pleasure to meet Sir Kione. Julitan wanted to know what Merquint had been talking about with Certesius. Merquint decided to study under Certesius, for the sake of his race. As sad as it sounded, they would part ways here. Carnelian asked if the old man had agreed so easily. At first, he was against it, but Malak helped him a lot. She didn't expect that evil spirit to help him. And again, the seal calls him an evil spirit. She was even sure that he had his own motive. Shio asked if it wasn't obvious. He just likes Merquint. But isn't that elf a man? Malak replied that gender didn't matter to him. Probably no one expected such a situation. Carnelian was disappointed that she would now have to travel with unpopular men. Shio replied that Merquint was also a man. After all, the girl had said unpopular men. After meeting Julitan, Carnelian, and Shio, Merquint found a new life. Therefore, he sincerely thanks them all. Merquint will definitely repay them for their kindness one day. After that, they decided to go down, from the top of the mountain, straight to the entrance of the city. This old eccentric had done something right for the first time. Shio asked what had happened to the delicate lady. Shio even began to mimic her, imitating how she had called Sir Julitan when they were pretending to be lovers. Carnelian immediately replied that she had not been like that. Julitan just stared at the place where the city had been. Carnelian told the master to hurry up. They didn't have all day. They had to get to the church before someone caught up with them. The guy asked what church they were talking about. It was the city temple with the central church of Hesfarkona. In short, it was a holy city. There, they had to pretend to be sincere believers and go straight to Dalekot. He simply couldn't believe his eyes. There were many beggars whose bodies were already too thin, women who looked suspiciously at the newcomers. It seemed as if they were looking without any interest. Could this really be the holy city? Saint. Shio asked if she hadn't said that this was a temple city. They had indeed said that, but it didn't look anything like Julitan had imagined. Perhaps they worship the god of entertainment. They just had to get through here as quickly as possible. Reason replied that it wouldn't work. The gates to the docks were guarded by border guards like a checkpoint. All roads leading to Dalekut were blocked. There was no way to get to where they were going. What kind of red-eyed seal is this that makes the Northerners come here? The border guards are already on their way. We need to hurry, but what should we do? Shio asked what he thought about it. They could eat first and find a place to stay. They can't do anything right now. Carnelian shouted at him to be realistic. There's no time to loaf around. When there is no answer, one must simply eat and sleep. That is the wisdom of the orcs. It was hard to admit, but he was right about that. Meanwhile, in the mine, 2 men were chasing some child. The man noticed the child turn a corner and ran straight after him. However, there was nothing there. The kid had already hidden. They had to catch him, or they would be killed. But they were wrong in thinking it was a boy. In fact, it was a girl who had almost been caught. Everyone on the street was starving, and they had stockpiled all this food here. Suddenly, a man shouted that he had found the child. He was here. Meanwhile, Julitan was standing on the street. She said she'd be back soon, so where was she? Carnelian said that the usual methods wouldn't work anymore. She decided to go and find out what was going on. The girl told him to stay there. The guy started to remember what had happened last time. He asked her not to say that she was causing new problems there. Suddenly, he heard a scream telling them to stop immediately. At first, he thought it was Carnelian. Then the girl ran into the main character, Sherlin, Tolbane's younger sister. Julitan apologized to her. Just as she started to gather the food back, a man suddenly hit her. Only then did he see that it wasn't a little bastard. It was a little idiot. Julitan immediately snapped out of it and asked what he was doing. A knife appeared at his throat. The man threatened that if he uttered another word, he would die along with her. Another man was watching all this from the roof. A guy immediately appeared who wanted to attack the man who wanted to kill the girl. Without hesitation, he stabbed the man with the blade. They could only watch the scene in shock. The man who had threatened Julitan immediately recognized the face. It was Tolbane, members of the Assassin's Guild. The man had no idea what he was doing there. At that very moment, he was killed by another assassin's blade. Tolbane turned his attention to his younger sister. He saw her stealing again. The guy had told her to stop doing such dangerous things. Sherlin asked if she was supposed to let the children die of hunger. She wouldn't do that. Tolbane explained that they might kill her before they killed them. Sherlin told him to forget about it. He was working for the guild, so he should get out of there. Tolbane pointed his weapon at Julitan and asked who he was. However, the girl didn't even know about it. In any case, it didn't matter. This guy knew that she had stolen things from the organization, and he also knows that Tolbane killed several members of the guild. Therefore, the witness must be eliminated. There were many troops on the street. People were discussing that even the Lion of the Gate had come down here. Is the red-eyed seal really that powerful? Even the General's son is here. By the General's son, they meant Kimin. The red-eyed seal threatened the safety of the Empire, and now it was heading for Dalekot. From now on, not a single ant would leave the Holy City without his permission. Archibald Eisengram, military commander of Hesfarkun. Suddenly he saw Carnelian approaching and immediately jumped back. Then a dagger flew toward her, which she easily deflected. Tolbane was already behind her. However, the girl reacted quickly and struck. The guy was no slouch either and managed to jump out of the way of her blow. Of course, he noticed that she was swinging her sword as if nothing had happened. Carnelian asked the master if he was okay. Julian replied that he was. Hearing this, he even thought that this girl was his slave. After these words, Carnelian's sword immediately flew at him. At the same time, it managed to get close enough to strike again. He would have been better off not jumping to conclusions, for she was the seal. Julitan came to his defense. He asked Carnelian to stop. She did not understand his actions, for the master had nearly perished. Julitan explained calmly that the man was only trying to protect his sister. Then he held out his hand to him. Julitan would make sure no one said anything unnecessary, so they wouldn't be staying here long. Tolbane did not take advantage of this offer, and simply stood up on his own. Carnelian apologized for interrupting them, but it was impossible. All the borders were closed. She couldn't find even the slightest opening. The guy replied that they would have to find another way. Tolbane asked if they were trying to cross the border. Julitan asked if he knew of any way. There was a small risk, but a way existed. Carnelian mentioned that he'd better not lie. Then he said that they would have to become slaves. The best export goods in the Holy City were drugs and slaves. But the slave trade was illegal here. And if this business is illegal, then there must be a secret route for trade. It turns out they can use this route to escape. He could connect them with illegal slaves. Carnelian asked why they should trust him. Tolbane had no intention of lying to such monsters. Besides, their disappearance would play into his hands. He thought that should be enough of an answer. Julitan noticed that his sister had already left and asked if she would be all right. He also thought that they did not have a very good relationship, but received no response. Apparently, that was indeed the case. After that, the two of them returned to Shio, who didn't understand why they had taken so long. Carnelian had something to discuss with the master. Shio was surprised that they wanted to do it without him. But then the guy realized something. Shio guessed that they had been on a date. Even their expressions confirmed it. But before he could finish his sentence, a sword was already at his throat. Carnelian kindly explained that if he crossed the line again, she would sell him into slavery. She even swore. Sherlin finally returned to the others. The girl asked her why she had come so late. Sherlin showed that she had brought them fruit. The woman didn't even know how to thank the girl. The children were starving. A sleepy boy also came out to them and saw that Sherlin had arrived. The girl asked him why he wasn't sleeping. The boy replied that his stomach was rumbling. She handed him some fruit and told him to go back to bed right away. The woman thanked the girl again. Charlene was about to leave and asked them to rest. The boy asked when she would return and when they would play. Charlene stroked his head and also mentioned that she would be back soon. But now he needed to go to sleep. The boy remembered her promise. At the same time, she was also being watched. It was Tolbane. In a huge closed room, there were many people who were conducting experiments on fruit. Crowley approached them. He was the Imperial Minister of Security and commander of the Special Forces. He wanted to know if the experiment was going smoothly. The man explained that there were no problems with the experiment, but the border patrols stationed in the area were causing problems. These ignorant bastards are ruining everything. They are putting the Empire's great plans into motion. Crowley also said to make sure that they were operating without any problems. In the morning, the man told everyone to hurry up because they were leaving soon. He turned to a large, thin man. They had to go downstairs and make sure that all the goods were in place. On his orders, they went downstairs, where bound people were sitting. It was noticeable that their numbers had decreased during that time. Rumors of the patrol's arrival had affected deliveries. Or maybe they were cowards. But this time, the quality of the goods was excellent. And as it turned out, one of those captured was Sherlin. He grabbed her by the chin, saying that this idiot was young and beautiful. She could fetch a good price. But then the man pointed in another direction, saying that there was even better merchandise there. This girl was the best of all the ones he had seen this year. It had been a long time since they had such good product. The ship sailed away. The captain replied that they should continue sailing until further notice. After that, the man decided to rest. The man asked if he was going to take a nap. Of course, it was obvious. He was tired of this man constantly bothering him, so he told him to go and check the goods. It was as if he had been waiting for that order. He really couldn't concentrate because of her face. The man asked his older brother what he was going to do. They were almost across the border, and the captain was asleep. So who cared what they were doing here? Carnelian just smiled. The man also saw that she had a very beautiful smile. The fearless are the most attractive. She immediately broke the ropes and hit the man on the head. The other man just stood there watching. At the same time, Carnelian decided to knock him out too. After that, she decided to untie the master and Shio. Carnelian asked him what was wrong. Julian said that he was seasick, and that it was his first time on a ship. If she thought about it, she saw someone familiar. It was Sherlin. Julian asked if she was also trying to get to Dalekot. The girl replied that she wasn't, and now it became clear that she had been captured. However, she refused to admit it. Sherlin said that her brother had forced her to board the ship. He said that her life was in danger. She had to return as soon as possible. There were children in Santa who needed her help. She couldn't let them live the way she did. Tolbane seemed to care deeply for her. Julitan was sure he had a good reason. Carnelian interrupted their conversation, saying that they should not know any more than they already did. Carnelian would give her the vessel so she could return as soon as they arrived in Dalekot. Sherlin asked how she planned to get the ship to her. It's quite simple. Just take the ship. So Crowley wants him to leave the Special Forces alone. Saint is under the jurisdiction of the Church of Hesfarkon, and the Special Forces have been protecting Saint and the Church for centuries. That's why Archibald is being told to stay put, since he's a stranger here. Stop sending humanitarian aid to Dalekot. This action ignores Saint's autonomy. This city has its own laws. Assistance to other countries cannot take precedence over the affairs of Hesfarkona. If he insists on continuing the deliveries, he will have to face Archibald and the other border patrols. However, he believed that no matter how magnificent the border guards were, they could not block the entire ocean. The general turned to Crowley and suggested that he try to do so, especially if he was so confident. The captain heard someone calling him in a girl's voice, so he woke up immediately. Then he saw that it was Carnelian. A few seconds later, he was completely beaten and even serving Carnelian. Carnelian asked the captain if they had already crossed the border. The captain replied that they would cross soon. When the girl asked how much longer they would have to wait, he replied that he would check right away. The subordinate informed the captain that there was a huge reef ahead. The captain asked what he meant. There couldn't be a reef here. Carnelian immediately realized what was happening. There were many ships ahead. The man reported that they were surrounded. They must drop all weapons and keep their hands above their heads. Carnelian immediately recognized that voice. This simply couldn't be happening. He decided to repeat it once more. Julitan ran up to her, wanting to know what was happening. And only then did he also hear the familiar voice. From that moment on, if they did not surrender, they would be considered enemies. It was Huizhen and Kimain. Kimin Eisengram also saw the very same guys he had parted with just a short time ago. The commander of the 7th Border Guard unit. She tried to stop feeling nervous. Now they were slaves. Carnelian turned to the captain, who immediately flinched. They were slaves, after all. Therefore, the captain had to make sure he played his part. It was best if he wanted to live. The captain had better speak calmly, otherwise they would think he was a slave. Kimain and Huizhen jumped onto the deck from their ship. Huizhen also didn't understand why Carnelian was here. Kimin doesn't know what's going on, but she should also lower her weapon. Carnelian immediately said Sir Kimin's name and ran to him. She ran into his arms, saying how scared she was. The girl thought that at this rate, she would become a slave. His face turned completely red, and he didn't even know what to say in response. She glared at the captain. The captain tried to play his part well, saying that she was a slave. She should return to the basement where she belonged. He said this in a mechanical voice. Huizhen immediately saw through this lousy actor. Even if Sir Kimin didn't know she was a seal with such a huge sword, he would never believe she was a real slave. Kimin shouted for the bastard to shut up. Not only had he tried to sell her into slavery, but now he was threatening her. The man asked her to believe that no one would dare harm her as long as he was by her side. It actually worked. Carnelian thanked Sir Kimin, because thanks to him, they were able to return to Saint. But in reality, she was afraid that they would return to where they started. Kimin replied that he would help in any way he could, so they should not hesitate to contact him for anything. Huizhen turned to the master and told him that they had found a suspicious white powder. He needed to take a look at it. He then opened the bag. Julitan asked if something was wrong. Kimin explained that they needed to conduct an investigation, so they had to leave them. After that, they left. The slave routes are now blocked. Is there really no other way? Shio decided to repeat what needed to be done when she couldn't find a solution. However, she no longer wanted to hear any mention of orcs. They didn't even have money for lodging. Sherlin wanted to take care of it for them, but in return they had to follow her. The man asked, holding the woman by the throat where she had gotten it. However, she didn't answer, so he had to press her against the wall. It would be better if she confessed voluntarily. Another woman wanted to come out to tell the director that something was wrong with the children. It all happened after they had sown the fruit. Then a knife appeared near her. He turned his attention to the woman, as she clearly knew where the fruit had come from. Tolbane wiped his blade. Suddenly, he sensed another presence and immediately went to the entrance. As soon as the man began to approach the room, he decided to attack him. Only then did he notice that it was Sherlin. It seemed that sending her into slavery wasn't enough for him. Tolbane didn't understand why they had all returned. It wasn't that they wanted to come back here, but his sister had done it. Sherlin asked how he could send her away. The guy explained that he had no choice. Now everyone in the organization was hunting for the thief. She would die if she was caught. Then they asked him what exactly she had stolen. He told them it was the fruit of illusions, a special white powder that had plunged the city into hell. These fruits were the basis for the production of drugs. Then she remembered how she had given the fruit to the children. Sherlin looked at her hands, which had given the fruit to the children. Tobane wanted to tell her that she would have to hide for at least a few more weeks. However, she didn't want him to touch her with his dirty hands. He knew that Sherlin was going to give the fruit to the children, but he didn't say anything to her. She wouldn't pretend to be blind like Tolbane. He has eyes, but he lives like a blind man. Julitan asked if he was okay. Tolbane told him that the guild had a secret underground passage. If they used it, they could cross the border. Carnelian asked if it was really true. To get through there without any complications, they needed a map. If they promised to take Sherlin with them, he would give them the map. Carnelian couldn't believe he dared to try to bargain further. Julitan stopped her, and also explained that if Sherlin refused to go with them, they couldn't force her. Meanwhile, the girl finally ran to where the director and the children were to find out if they were all right. With tears in her eyes, she tried to explain what had happened to the fruit she had brought. Suddenly, she heard an unfamiliar voice. It was the girl who had stolen the fruit. At that moment, her head was covered with a bag. Assassin Guild headquarters. A man blocked his way, saying that no one should disturb him. Tolbane explained that he had come because he had been called. They heard her voice coming from the room. He recognized it as Tolbane's, so he ordered them to let him in. As soon as he entered, he did not expect to see such a sight. At the man's feet lay Sherlin, beaten and bruised. He tried not to show any emotion. Tolbane asked if he had something to say to him. The man said that this idiot had stolen his fruit. He ordered that she be taken to the forest to be fed to the animals. Then he picked up the girl and went to carry out the order. The leader of the Assassin Guild. As soon as he took a couple of steps, he immediately started running. He cursed that bastard in his mind. The boy was sitting right in front of the guild leader. It turned out that his father had sold him. It was obvious that he had been born to be sold as an assassin with a special spell on his eyes. It turned out that there were people worse than them. They decided to take this guy and make something useful out of him. The goal of today's training was to survive. It was a truly bloody spectacle. And as it happened, he was the only child to survive. Then they were ordered to find more children to fill the ranks. His first mission was ironic. Find his own father who had sold him. At least he should have a chance to take revenge. A portrait of his father lay at his feet. He ran to the house. Tolbane began to knock, hoping someone would let him in. The door opened. However, there stood a stranger who noticed that someone seemed to be seriously injured. Tolbane asked who he was. There is something very interesting that the leader said at that time. He said that a traitor would come here. The guy immediately pulled out a weapon to get rid of his enemy. After that, he finished off the man. As soon as he entered, he laid the girl on the bed and told her to hold on. He would go find a doctor. However, as soon as he stepped outside, he suddenly noticed that there was already a crowd of people there. There was the leader of the Assassin Guild, who couldn't believe that he dared to bite the hand that fed him. Ungrateful dogs should be gotten rid of. Sherlin begged her older brother not to go there. However, he simply closed the door leading into the house. The leader ordered his men to catch the boy. Tolbane drew his weapon and immediately entered the fray. Thanks to his skills, he was able to stand up to such a crowd. Sherlin, with tears in her eyes, even covered her ears so she wouldn't hear all the screaming. The boy didn't stop. He needed to kill everyone who threatened his family. It didn't matter how strong he was. The rest of the guild was already on their way. He was enjoying watching how long he could hold out. A subordinate ran up to him and told the boss that they had a problem. The man asked what had happened. Then he reported that all the guild members had been killed. The man couldn't believe what he was saying. They had been attacked by some woman. Finally, Carnelian was able to find them. Why was he out on the street during work hours? She had wasted her time going through the cave. At first, he thought the woman had gone mad. Then his subordinate wanted to explain everything. However, before he could finish his sentence, his head was severed from his shoulders. Carnelian pointed her weapon at him. The leader asked who she was. Carnelian said she was the one who needed something from him. Tolbane, Shio, Carnelian, Julitan, and the guild leader walked through the tunnel. Tolbane couldn't help but wonder if he would end up like his subordinates. Tolbane thanked her for her help. If it weren't for her, he would have certainly died. However, she did not want to hear words of gratitude. They had come because they could not trust him. After that, they entered the room. Shio watched the leader closely. Finally, he found it. It was the very map they had asked for. He had done everything she wanted, so now he asked that they simply let him live. Carnelian agreed to spare his life. She took the map from his hands, but the same could not be said for Tolbane. He had a completely different attitude. He tried to play on her pity, saying that he was the one who raised this child. However, even that didn't work on Tolbane. He simply wanted to kill this man. All those childhood memories flashed through his mind. After that, the guy pointed out that the entrance was behind that wall. Carnelian touched the wall and heard something click. The others heard it too, and now they just needed to push a little. Of course, Carnelian simply decided to destroy the entrance. Julitan shouted at her to stop. Carnelian tried to calm him down, saying that she was carefully controlling her strength. But she hadn't expected to encounter Kione so quickly, and he didn't expect to see Lady Carnelian here either. The girl wondered why he was here at all. Carnelian decided to use the same trick again. Sir Kimin came to save her once more. Julitan just watched silently. The girl explained that the bad guys had kidnapped them again. She was very afraid that they would sell them again, but her words did not match reality. They were all dead. Carnelian had completely forgotten that she had killed them all. So she decided to say that without Sir Tolbane, they would have died long ago. This man was amazing. He was able to stand up to all the members of the guild by himself. Tolbane was convinced that she was completely shameless. Hoisin, of course, did not believe that such a thing could have been done by that guy. There were many wounds on the corpses, some of which had been inflicted by some kind of stinger, and some by a sword. In addition, she had destroyed the stone wall in front of him. Sir Kimin would obviously not believe this nonsense, but his guess was immediately dismissed. Her trick had worked again. Kione was glad that Lady Carnelian was safe. Carnelian asked how they got there. The guy said they found a strange tunnel near the border. It seemed to be a secret passage for crossing the border. They followed it and ended up here. She couldn't believe there was a tunnel here. But now Carnelian was convinced that this path really did lead to the border. They would have to leave for now and come back at night. They would just have to knock out a few soldiers. Suddenly, they heard a noise. Kione tried to calm her down and told her that it was the sound of tunnels being blown up at the border. The explosion wouldn't be heard that far away, so she didn't need to worry. Carnelian couldn't understand why they were so strict about work ethics. Kione ordered them to search every corner. There might be evidence of drugs here. However, another group of people arrived and told them to stop. It was Sir Crowley. Crowley asked when border guards had been given the right to conduct searches in the city. Kione explained that they were there for Togo, to uncover an organization that was crossing the border. Border guards should stay at the border. Crowley said he didn't take the special unit seriously because his dad was the commander-in-chief of Hesfakon. Kione said that wasn't true. Then let him take his lackeys and leave. Kione cannot do that. Crowley couldn't believe that this man was trying to disobey him. According to the investigation, this organization and the Special Forces had made some kind of deal. Crowley asked if they were under suspicion. They don't want to suspect the special unit, but they will continue the investigation here. They decided to lay all their weapons bare. The knights were also on alert, Julitan whispered, asking if they weren't on the same side. Carnelian considered them all the same. However, they were trying to figure out which one of them was better. The girl wondered whether she should try to help Kimin. Hesfarkon. Currently, border guards are investigating a special unit in Sente. What would happen if they discovered the truth about Sente? The strong suppress from the outside, and the smart destroy from the inside. What would happen if that dim-witted General Eisenham found out the truth about Sente? I wonder what his reaction will be. The man turned to Sir Crowley, saying that they were in a disadvantageous position. Therefore, they should retreat. Crowley asked how he dared to say that to him. The investigation team rushed in, ready for action. Crowley didn't understand why now of all times. He had to hide his weapon, saying that he would leave it behind today. So he considered himself lucky. Kimin told his subordinates that they must not miss a single piece of evidence. Every corner must be searched. In his mind, he cursed that insolent brat. An underground church complex. A plantation of illusory fruit. Crowley reported that the border guards had discovered the headquarters near the guild. How troublesome. All the members of the headquarters were dead. It was only a matter of time before the plantation was discovered. So they had to gather all their forces. The leader of the Saint Church. It was he who advised Sir Crowley to pull himself together. Even if they find out the location, they won't be able to get here. Attacking the church is treason against God and the Emperor. Thanks to the border guards, they don't have enough people to distribute drugs. However, Crowley thought that this bastard was too stupid. Crowley said they should gather all their forces immediately. So why is he so relaxed? The church leader should be doing all this right now. If he really wants to keep his goods, they'll both die if the border guards get here. Crowley hoped he had made himself clear. The border guards' barracks. Kimin apologized, but he also asked them to cooperate until the investigation was complete. Of course, they would cooperate. Carnelian hoped that all the bad people would get what they deserved. Shio thought they had already gotten what they deserved from her. They heard a man's voice saying that he had a report on the special forces and drugs. Kimain told him to come in. Then he noticed that Sir had guests. However, Kimain replied that everything was fine and asked him to give him the report. They obtained evidence of collusion between the guild and the special forces, but the source of the drugs is still unknown. Judging by the fact that distribution continues even after the borders have been closed, the plantation is most likely located in Saint's territory. An implantation of this scale cannot go unnoticed. Sherlin and Tobane arrived there. The girl replied that such an implantation could not go unnoticed, of course. Julitan asked how she was feeling. Sherlin replied that she was feeling better. Tobane said that his sister knew where the plantation was. She had said herself that she wanted to help. Kimin asked if she really knew the location. The plantation was located in the headquarters of the Hesfarkona Church. He hadn't expected such a plantation to be located in the headquarters itself. Especially not with the church involved. Sherlin saw it with her own eyes. Under the church is a place where illusory fruits are grown on a large scale. This explains why the special forces guarding the church are trying so hard to prevent the investigation. But attempting to investigate the church could be considered treason. This means they cannot investigate using conventional methods. Sherlin said there was a secret way. But they would need a guide, as the path was too difficult. Kimain asked if she could be their guide. The girl agreed. It wasn't just for the children, but for all the inhabitants of Saint in the end. Tolbane asked her to promise that she would return immediately after helping them find the place. They also decided to help. A little later, Sherlin led them to the very place. Now they were convinced that it was true. Kimin hadn't even thought that the church was producing drugs. Of course, Crowley was already waiting for them. Still, they managed to get this far. They were growing plants that had been declared illegal by the authorities. Kimain was going to arrest him. However, Crowley just laughed. Crowley asked if it was because he was still young. What bravado he has. 10 years ago, the city of Saint Temple was founded in this place. People from all over the empire settled in this secluded place. Years of research conducted by the city's inhabitants. Who, in his opinion, had come up with all this? Sir Crowley asked if he even looked like he had such authority. Julitan wondered if they had used ordinary people as guinea pigs. Kimin shouted for him to shut up. Just stop talking and give up. Suddenly, Crowley attacked them. His attack hit the plantation. Now the road was blocked. After that, their small group was surrounded by other people. Of course, they already knew that this place would be found. Weren't they curious why Crowley had decided to stay here? He needed to silence those who were trying to escape. So let them not even think about surviving today. Huizhen shouted for people to hold their positions. They couldn't let them break formation. However, he himself understood that they were outnumbered. They continued to attack the border guards, keeping their distance. Then we have to attack directly. At first, Crowley didn't let him get close, but then Kimain tried again. Thanks to the surprise, he was able to grab the weapon from his hands, but it turned out that Crowley had a hidden weapon. Fortunately, Kione reacted quickly and turned away. Thanks to this, Crowley grabbed his wrist and set it on fire. Crowley told this scum that mages always had to have a trump card for close combat. After that, he even said goodbye to Kione. But that wasn't the end of it. Crowley noticed the released Kai. This threw him straight back against a tree. Just as Crowley was about to attack the bastard, he suddenly noticed that they had gotten so close to him. His arm had been severed. Kaimin asked the bastard if he didn't know that knights could use ki even without weapons. Kaimin shouted that their leader had fallen. Therefore, they should drop their weapons and surrender. Everyone dropped their weapons. However, he didn't manage to keep track of where Crowley had gone. He clearly couldn't have gone far. Kione ordered half of them to follow him, while the rest were to clear the area. The members of the special forces were tied up. Those who managed to escape would be caught anyway. It seems that everything has finally been resolved. Carnelian even thought she would die from collecting dust. Julitan replied that she had done well. Saint will also recover soon. Shio asked if the vase only scared him. Carnelian leaned toward the wise man and asked if he knew anything about the vase. She replied that it was confidential information. It seems he doesn't quite understand his position. She took the stone and crushed it right in front of him. It would be great to keep his head. Didn't he think so too? Then he immediately admitted that it was a dark magic drug created in secret. It was still in the development stage, so the body would react negatively to it. It seemed that Sir Crowley had used it, but the man wasn't sure if he was okay. But why should they even bother about this madman, what he was all about? He can make people believe lies when they're high on drugs. In other words, he can control people. It only takes one exposure for everyone living here in Saint to fall under his influence. Tolbane couldn't believe that such insane bastards existed. He asked about an antidote. The man explained that there was a drug that prevented mind control. But for those already under its influence, the only way to get rid of it was to stop the controller. Tolbane demanded that he give him the medicine immediately. Meanwhile, monsters appeared in the city. The border guard tried to kill the damn monster. Another man tried to stop him, not understanding what he was doing. It was their commander, along with Huizen. He shouted for the man to control himself. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong with his body too. Then monsters appeared before his eyes as well. They all immediately attacked Kimin and his Sille. Huizen suggested that their minds might be distorted by mana. They would have to be killed. However, he couldn't kill his subordinates. There had to be a way to bring them to their senses. The ordinary residents were also under the influence of drugs. Now they were controlled by Crowley. He wouldn't go to hell alone. As soon as the guys ran up, they realized that this was the same mind control. They were already attacking their allies. Tolbine and Sherlin were fine. It seemed that the medicine was really working. As soon as they spotted their small group, they immediately rushed to attack them. Fortunately, Tolbane managed to knock them out with the hilt of his sword. From soldiers to townspeople, it seems that everyone is under control. If this continues, it will be really dangerous here. We need to stop at least the townspeople. Tolbane wanted Sherlin to hide in a safe place. Julitan also wanted to go. However, Carnelian stopped him. It would be too dangerous to go any further. In this situation, if her master was in danger, she would have to intervene. Then her identity would be revealed. And she, as a wanted criminal, would have to fight Kimain, who is a knight of the Empire. Although he is tired from fighting, he is still a knight who can control energy. Even if they win the fight, they will be sanctified before they can escape from Saint. So it's better for the master not to interfere, or he will die. Julitan replied that there were children among the locals who had not been exposed to the drug. He himself knew that it was unreliable, but there was no need to interfere. It was better to just quickly rescue the children. Carnelian sighed. This was not a request, but an order. The man thanked her for it. Carnelian didn't want to hear his words of gratitude. Next time, she wouldn't help. The man noticed their voices. Julitan had asked her to be careful, but in reality, she was more worried about her master. Carnelian would wait. Fortunately, she managed to react in time and block the attack with her weapon. Another man wanted to attack her. However, Julitan protected her. As a result, he was wounded. Carnelian's eyes immediately turned red. Kimin heard something happen behind him. It was Carnelian who wanted to finish off the night. She was immediately stopped by Kimain. The man couldn't understand what had happened to Lady Carnelian. Then he noticed her red eyes. Perhaps that was the very reason why Huizen had been tense when they first met. Carnelian told him to leave immediately. Kimin replied that the woman in front of him was not the same lady he knew. Carnelian asked what had happened to Togo. The man mentioned that Carnelian was a fair person. She was kind, but it seemed like she had been influenced by someone else. The girl replied that if he interfered with her, she would kill him. Julitan spoke to her, asking her to put away her sword. As soon as she noticed it holding its wound, her weapon immediately fell to the ground. Carnelian didn't understand why they were putting on such a show. A subjugator. Someone who hides a seal or something like that. Julitan regretted breaking his promise immediately after making it. Only now did he realize that this was the very seal with red eyes that the Empire had been looking for. Carnelian asked if he was going to arrest her now. Kione did not want to do that. On the contrary, he wanted to use her power. He asked her to kill Crowley, who was the instigator of the riots. After that, he also asked her to channel her anger in the right direction. Julitan also told her to help these people. Carnelian asked him to take care of the master. If he was harmed again, she would kill everyone there. Kione nodded in agreement. She then immediately jumped high into the air to track down that filthy rat. Then she noticed someone approaching Kione. If the rejection of the mass intensified inside the body, it would cause a chain reaction explosion. The body would become a bomb, and he didn't want to die alone. They would die with him. An explosion occurred in front of him. Fortunately, Huizhen arrived in time to protect him. A shield formed around the explosion and also sealed Crowley inside. Kione begged Huizhen not to do it. Carnelian noticed that he had decided to absorb the entire explosion. After that, Huizhen fell on top of him. In fact, he was glad that his master was unharmed. However, Kione was worried about him. The guy didn't understand why he had acted so recklessly. Seals exist for Togo to protect their masters. It's natural. But Crowley had pinned his hopes on this moment. He was going to die soon anyway, so killing one child was nothing. Kione shouted that he was a bastard. Crowley explained that if the knight died, he would spare the child. Kione had to demonstrate the knightly skills he boasted about. The guy demanded that he keep his promise. Crowley just laughed, saying it was obvious, but at that moment, his head was severed from his shoulders. Carnelian and Tolbane attacked him. The child immediately ran to his mother. Carnelian noticed that they had almost collided. Tolbane explained that anyone who talks nonsense becomes a hasty target for him. The girl replied that she had been there much earlier. However, Tolbane believed that he had won. Every member of the squad is required to report on the wounded and dead. If the position of squad commander is vacant, the report must be made by the deputy squad commanders. Suddenly, the general arrived. They all began to greet him. Archibald also greeted his men. His gaze immediately fell on Carnelian. Of course, he was quick on his feet. Kione immediately ran up to them. Archibald asked who these people were. The guy replied that they had helped them. However, he wanted to say something about the girl. Julitan interrupted the conversation and explained that this was the man with whom he had promised to spend his entire life. The old man watched them silently at first, but then he understood everything. Carnelian didn't know what the old man wanted to say. Archibald thanked them for helping the border guards on behalf of the commander-in-chief. Julitan replied that he couldn't have done it alone. Everyone here contributed. It seemed that there really were many good people here in Sente. It was risky, but he explained that they were all from Dalekot. They were stuck in Sente on their way home. After all, the old man already knew everything. If he showed that he wanted to escape in this way, they would all confess that they were a gang of red-eyed seals. Archibald said to stop it. He was literally asking the commander-in-chief to let them cross the border. Julitan replied that he was just explaining the situation. The old man just smiled. There must be someone who can stop this recklessness. This young man is willing to do anything for his girlfriend. Archibald suggested they talk in private. Carnelian did not expect him to want to talk to her. Carnelian began to look around, not understanding why they were going so far away. Archibald immediately drew his weapon and attacked her. Fortunately, she managed to react in time. Archibald believed she was too dangerous, and of course he knew that it was the red-eyed seal. Everything happened just as Carnelian had thought. She had been recognized. After all, she had a powerful aura. The girl repelled the old man's attack. She wanted to continue the fight, but suddenly noticed that he had put his things back in their sheaths. He had received orders from His Majesty to capture the red-eyed girl and the seal. However, he had not found anyone with red eyes. There was only the story of the blue-haired boy. She still needed a ship to get to Dalekota. Carnelian didn't understand why he had suddenly become so friendly. What kind of parents would abandon the one who saved their child? Archibald was grateful. However, her master deserves praise, but being around her is too difficult. Carnelian asked why the general didn't take care of himself. He was certainly an excellent knight, but it didn't seem like he had much time left. Archibald replied that being near her would be dangerous, and perhaps deadly. Perhaps it was none of his business, but it would be better to think about it. In fact, Carnelian understood all this herself. The Empire of Okalant, the Imperial Palace of Oberammerg. Michelle couldn't even handle this. The seal apologized, saying that it would call the cook. However, he replied that Michelle should do it again. The girl reminded Mr. Offenbach that there were 100 cooks in this castle, but he told her to do it again. Since Boko was nowhere to be seen, he began to suspect that the Garang had gone to Dalekot. Michelle asked if that was the case. After all, he was a fool to expect anything from Hesfarkon's people. If he went to deal with it himself, Molkabel would cause trouble. Her face darkened at the mere mention of Molkabel. The man asked if it wasn't better to be with him than with Molkabel. The seal remained silent. Doesn't she like it here? Does she really want to go back? She is a seal that follows the orders of her master. From the moment Lady Molkabel handed her over, she has been the seal of Lord Offenbach. It was boring for him too. Haken, commander of the independent unit Geist Reich of Offenbach's Special Guard. He asked for the opportunity to personally subdue Garang. The man wanted to prove his loyalty. Is he acting this way because Garang beat him half to death? And now he wants revenge now that she has lost her powers? Haken replied that this was not the case. For now, he wants to test people to see if they are just insects that can't even catch a weakened Garang, or not. But why is Garang acting as if she is in a trance? Bluffenchilt, leader of the Special Guard Geistreich. She was afraid that Teschen would return. However, Teschen will never return, because he is with someone who cannot return on his own. Since he said that Teschen cannot return on his own, it means that it is possible with the help of another power. And it seems that Garang is the key. Offenbach, did you notice that she looks impatient, as if she wants to know the method? Bluffenchilt apologized if she seemed rude. The Emperor replied that he knew well that she admired Teschen, but if she angers him again, he will kill her. The girl would keep that in mind. In any case, he wanted to give people another chance. He did not want to destroy the world he had created with his own hands. Shio asked if this was really unexpected. He really hadn't expected Tolbane to want to leave Saint. His whole world was Saint. Of course, he would miss it, but he wondered if this world could be a place of happiness. Or was it all just a creation of time and space? That's quite a decisive goal. It turns out that Sherlin is also leaving. She, on the other hand, had decided to stay. Sherlin wanted to make this city better with her own hands. He wanted to do that too. The guy replied that they both needed it. Exactly 10 years later, she would be waiting in Sant. Then he would come here. In 10 years, they would meet at this place. Carnelian wasn't sure about that, but she thanked him anyway. However, the knight believed that, on the contrary, he should thank them. After all, he could have died on Mount Haiti. She had thought about it many times. Kimin considered her an elegant lady. Perhaps it was because of his lack of education. Suddenly, Carnelian kissed him on the forehead. He was shocked by this sight. The girl replied that it was a sign of gratitude. Her master was extremely poor, so it was all she could offer. And he was indeed a magnificent knight. After that, Carnelian said goodbye to him. She pulled Duzlatana's cheek, saying that she would do more for him later if he asked nicely. Does that mean he's still young now? Now, as they say, if you saddle up, the wind will change. It seems they have managed to escape Offenbach's clutches a little. We need to run away as far as possible. Carnelian asked if he was okay. Shio replied that he had been feeling unwell all day. The girl replied that she didn't often suffer from seasickness, so she even offered her help. Carnelian advised him to stare intently at the horizon. Julitan noted that the horizon might seem a little unfamiliar, but it should definitely help. However, Shio didn't think it was helping much. Then Carnelian hit him. Carnelian asked what was wrong with him. She was glad that it had become a little quieter. Then she asked if her master's stomach hurt. Julitan replied that he was fine. She even felt sorry for him. If it had been her master, she would have put him on her lap and stroked him. Suddenly, he felt nauseous. What a beautiful sunset. She hadn't just admired it like that, without thinking about anything, in a long time. The boy also thought that this sunset seemed very remarkable. Suddenly, Julitan announced that he wanted to become a knight. She clearly wasn't expecting to hear that. Carnelian asked if he was joking. If it was because of her show, there was no need to worry about it. The main character wants to protect her from Offenbach. They can't run away from him forever. She didn't want to hear this nonsense. Julitan would die before he ever saw Offenbach's face. But that didn't matter. Carnelian asked how it didn't matter. Even her former master said he would protect her, and in the end he died. A person who disappeared after death would be fine. But what about a person who had to live on and preserve that memory? As long as that bastard Offenbach doesn't catch her, she's fine with staying together for now. The stronger he becomes, the more dangerous they all will be. But she doesn't need a strong master. She walked past Tolbane. Once again, Carnelian couldn't control her emotions. Her eyes turned red again. Tolbane even thought they had been fighting, as it was the first time he had seen Carnelian with such an expression on her face. He had seen her angry expression many times before, but this was the expression of fear of losing a precious connection. Julitan said that he dreamed of becoming an ordinary chef, fishing, cooking, and treating people to his food. He wanted to live like his father had lived. But then he met Carnelian. When she woke up from a long sleep, she asked what her name was. And at that moment, Julitan felt that their lives were intertwined. Tolbane asked if he regretted it. But he doesn't regret it. Now he can't even imagine a future without Carnelian by his side. Despite having lived only 16 years, he was certain of one thing. The head chef and the seal were clearly not meant for each other. But if they had been perfect for each other from the start, there would have been no need to make an effort for each other. Doesn't he think that would have been interesting? He just didn't want to lose Carnelian. The next day, he woke up to the sound of people trying to wake Julitan. Carnelian was gone. Tolbane said they had searched the entire cabin but found nothing. The news shook him deeply. After all, Something had happened that he never wanted to happen. They spent half the day searching every corner of the ship, but they couldn't find any trace of Carnelian. Was his determination to protect her too much of a burden for Carnelian? Even her absence made her image clearer. Black hair with slightly faded colors. The light and warmth of her smile were in her eyes, a small chuckle escaping from the corner of her mouth when she was happy. A sight of endless delight even in the smallest things. A figure that hides heartache and solitude. He fell to the deck and couldn't hold back his tears. A week later, Shio didn't understand why there had been no wind for a whole week. Tolbane noticed Julitan and told him to stop daydreaming. After all, he was the only one who knew the ship and the sea well. Even the food was running out. Tolbane was ashamed to support the weak. If Julitan didn't take control of the ship right now, he would kill him right there and then. Shio didn't understand what he was doing, holding a knife to his friend's throat. He had to stop this now. Suddenly, Tolbane heard something approaching them. Shio asked if it was a ship. He started waving and shouting that there were people here. Shio asked for help. Tolbane noticed that it didn't look like a rescue ship that would save them. It was a pirate ship. The pirate ship rammed into their ship. Tolbane pulled Shio away from that spot just in time. The captain ordered the old ship to be burned. The new one was right in front of them. They really started burning their old ship. Shio couldn't believe they had decided to blow up their own ship. They must be planning to take the ship. What madness. After that, the pirates ran aboard another ship, saying that they would capture it. If everyone knelt down and surrendered, they wouldn't kill them. Instead, they would make them slaves. Shio also prepared to draw his weapon. Suddenly, one of the pirates was wounded. It was Tolbane. He advised them to only say such things after they had killed him. He introduced himself as a hired assassin from Saint. Tolbane had sent many like these guys, who thought themselves strong, to the afterlife. There was nothing to fear, as there were only 2 enemies. Shio shouted that there were actually 3 of them. One was slightly wounded, but he was still capable of fighting. He immediately turned to address the Julitan, but something seemed wrong with him. Julitan thought he could risk even his own life, but he had always been afraid to draw the hated sword. This guy had said himself that he wanted to become stronger. If he really had something he was willing to give his life for, he wouldn't be afraid to draw it. He also noticed that this guy had a strange aura about him. Tolbane was sure that this guy had lost his mind. Now he had no reason to doubt it. Julitan released his sword. A seal appeared on his feet. Shio couldn't believe he had exposed the Infitar. He was radiating mana. Some evil spirits even began to appear. But at that moment, the main character immediately fell. Shio immediately ran to him. Fortunately, he could hear his heartbeat. It seemed like the guy had just lost consciousness. Tolbane said they would meet his demands, so they should find a way to get to Dalekot. If the pirates arrived in Dalekot, they would simply hand over the ship. The man was not pleased with this audacity. However, he was stopped by the captain, who said that there was no point in spilling each other's blood. Since they had to go to Dalekot anyway, he offered to cooperate. Tolbane would not share the food, so they would have to figure that out themselves. Tolbane also wanted that if this guy Julitan died, they should throw him into the sea. And when he woke up, they should tell him to eat. A little later, Julitan was already busy fishing. Shio approached him to ask if the fishing was good today. He also noticed that the guy hadn't said a word since he woke up. Anyway, Julitan continued fishing and cooking. And then he caught another fish. The man ordered the sails to be set as soon as he felt the wind blowing. Shio was glad that the wind had finally picked up. Indeed, it is impossible to die in silence. However, Tolbane found this strange. Could the wind really be blowing that hard? In fact, it was a storm. The man ordered the sails to be lowered. Shio began to feel even more nauseous. Tolbane noticed that there was no way to die in silence. Julitan noticed something, but he immediately leaned over to see what it was. Tolbane stopped him, not understanding what he was doing. The main character pointed with a trembling hand at the sea. The guy asked what was there and what he was pointing at. There was a monster under the ship, namely a kraken. It exists in complete solitude. The immortal lord of the sea. They prepared to humbly greet Lord Mulkable, the water dragon. A huge whirlpool appeared before the kraken, and then a huge water dragon appeared there, and he could smell Garang on that ship. The main character immediately recognized the old name Carnelian. The guy asked if he really knew Garang. The dragon wondered who dared to ask such a question. Julitan gave his name and said he was Garang's tamer. However, the dragon did not believe this lie, but the guy insisted that it was not a lie. He was Garang's tamer, who had given her the name Carnelian. Kraken asked how this insolent man dared to play tricks in front of Lord Mulkable. Suddenly, a bright blue light appeared before them. The water dragon took on human form. She hadn't seen this in a long time, nor had she seen such fearless people. Suddenly, she slipped and fell. Mulkable didn't understand why there was seaweed here. Shio whispered, asking what was going on. It was ridiculous. However, she heard everything. Shio immediately apologized. Julitan helped her up and asked if she was okay. At least people were polite. Mulkibel remembered the name he had said, but she paid even more attention to his face. Mulkibel asked who he was. Julitan didn't understand what she meant. Then she asked again who he was. It seemed he had been mistaken for someone else. This guy was just a regular chef in Kione, and now he was Carnelian's tamer. But she didn't believe it was really true. It just couldn't be. Carnelian, whom he was talking about, was the Sille of Ticina, the dragon of the heavens, and he had signed the contract knowing that. Julitan replied that he didn't know. However, even if he had known what kind of creature it was, he would have accepted Carnelian anyway. He was still reckless. Julitan still didn't understand what he was talking about. He himself understands that it is reckless, but then the guy didn't want to say what happened when they last met. Molkabel interrupted him, saying that there must be some reason why they met this way. She would tell him a little secret. There are 3 kinds of dragons in this world: the dragon of the heavens, the earth dragon, and the sea dragon. Tessis is the leader of the sky dragons, and Molkabel is the leader of the sea dragons, and the leader of the earth dragons is Offenbach, a great emperor worshipped by mankind. Hundreds of years ago, a battle broke out between the earth dragons and the sky dragons. Offenbach took advantage of Tessis's only weakness, the seal, to trap him. The seal was supposed to protect its master, but it ended up getting him into trouble when he remembered those very words she had said, that it didn't matter. Even his former master had said he would protect her, but in the end, he died. And then she asked what a person should do who has to live and preserve the memory of the deceased. Molkabel asked if he was now Garang's tamer. Julitan replied that he was. To be more precise, he was Carnelian's tamer. Whatever her name was, she was a dragon's seal. He would never be able to handle it, because in the end, there would only be one unhappy ending. In any case, it didn't matter to him. Julitan promised to stay by her side. She was the only one he had to protect. It seems there is something that never changes under any circumstances. She noticed the sword at his waist and guessed that he didn't know how to use it yet. Cousin Haywood. He was greeted at the establishment and ordered a dry martini. Then Haywood noticed that he had seen her before. The reason replied that her name was Carnelian. She had started working there the day before. Haywood also introduced himself. He asked the girl how she ended up in such a remote place. Carnelian asked if everyone who came here looked alike. That meant they were either being pursued or on the run. If she needed help choosing a restaurant or other recommendations, he could help with that. She thanked him for his kindness. However, she already has someone she needs to meet. Julitan wanted to become stronger, so that Carnelian could return and never leave again. Molkabel asked if he was ready to risk his life. Julitan was ready to sacrifice his life at any moment, especially if it was to protect her. Bulfort. The man reported that spices had just arrived from Garbat, and the girl said that perfume would be brought from Okakanta tomorrow. Of course, she knew this news. These perfumes were so popular that everything was already reserved. In the distance, she saw the Gazbel fleet. Judging by the red ship there, Mr. Nolis must be there. In the coffee house, the man simply suggested they have some fun together for a while. The woman didn't understand why he was doing this, and told him to leave her alone. Since he hadn't been on land for a long time, it was better not to spoil the mood and just have some fun together. Another man intervened, noticing that she didn't like it. He should stop what he was doing. He immediately turned around to see who this immortal type was, who was addressing him like that. After a long voyage, he was tense, but still, if he was causing such a commotion, it could be a problem. It was Noblesse from the Gasball fleet. The man apologized, saying that he was tired and not himself. He then immediately ran away. The woman thanked the gentleman for his help. According to rumors, she now believed that he was truly a remarkable knight. The man replied that he was not a knight. A hand was placed on his shoulder, and he was told not to move. There was no need to thank such a lovely lady. He had simply done what was necessary. The old man thanked Sir Noblesse. This gentleman had saved them from a lot of trouble. After that, the old man said he would take them to where their companions were. Sir Noblesse is popular, and why is he like that? Shio said that in just 1 year, the great Noblesse had united the local pirates, and even gained the approval of the military fleet. Julitan asked Tolbein if he had come with Molkabel. He said that she had probably gone shopping again and was buying a bunch of clothes, but she had already bought them. And again, she dragged Gressida with her to the clothing store. Julitan thought it was dangerous on land, so it would be better to take guards with them. On land, she couldn't even use her strength. Molkabel didn't understand how these guys dared to speak such words to the Lord of the Seas. Shio asked why she had bought clothes again. The weight of the wet clothes would soon sink the ship. She thought it didn't matter because it was her hobby. He told her to put it here. Wasn't it heavy for Gressida? Gressida, the seal. She thanked her master for taking care of her. Tolbein told her not to follow Molkabel anymore. It was just extra trouble. Molkabel wanted to help. Shio was worried that she would get tired, regardless of whether Togo needed help or not. Shio also asked if she had ever thought about choosing one master. But for Gressida, Shio, Julitan, and Tolbein were all masters. Was it really necessary to choose one? Shio asked her not to take it seriously. She should do as she pleased. A man ran over and told Mr. Noblesse about the problem. Their sailors had been captured at noon. Shio asked where it was. The man replied that it was a wine shop in the city center. When he didn't have enough money for drinks, he said he would borrow it. Without any warning, they beat up all the sailors and demanded the money. The money for the drinks had to be paid back on time. Julitan said to go apologize, pay for the wine, and then come back. But they charged 10 gold coins for wine there. That amount is enough to buy some very decent clothes. That man has character after all. He said he wouldn't release anyone unless he got 10 gold coins. Shio didn't understand how he dared to threaten Gasball's pirate fleet. Tolbane decided to take care of it. It was surprising, because he didn't usually do anything so annoying. Tolbane replied that Julitan also had somewhere to go. Julitan thanked him for that. Tolbane told him to show him the way to the wine shop. Gracida asked the owner if everything would be all right. Shio patted her and told her not to worry. If she waited a little while, everything would look as if nothing had happened. Information Center. He noticed a familiar face, namely Mr. Noblesse. He wanted to know if anything had come in that might be useful information. This time, he also searched in a new city, but found nothing suitable. The fact that he couldn't find anything suitable in a year meant only one thing. A girl between the ages of 17 and 19, with black hair and red or blue eyes. If anyone matched this description, he asked them to contact him. He just sighed and asked Mr. Noblesse to be careful. As soon as he left the information center, he took only a few steps and looked up at the sky. Where was Carnelian now? Meanwhile, Tolbine arrived at the very same wine shop. At first, the man thought that this was the pirate leader named Noblesse. Tolbane gave his name. Noblesse was not a leader, and they were not pirates. They simply had a private fleet. Piracy or private raiding? In the end, isn't it the same thing? Shio noticed that he might be a little late. Did they really need to go there? Tolbane couldn't be that late. Julitan had a bad feeling. Shio asked what he was so afraid of. The owner of a wine shop couldn't be that powerful. Midday paradise. Tolbane would add a little more to the tab, so it was better to settle it quietly. Sille replied that when he got the 10 gold coins, they would end it quietly. Did he really think 10 gold coins was a reasonable price for drinks? It's not about the money. It includes payment for those dirty sailors harassing his wife. The man replied that she was so beautiful that he simply couldn't keep quiet. As soon as he heard those words, he immediately wanted to kill the man. His mouth was quickly shut. She turned to Sille. The girl asked them to stop and let the sailors go now, but he was still angry because of those guys. It was obvious that he was very angry. Since they couldn't come to an agreement, there was nothing to be done. Tolbane gave his name and asked what his name was. He even felt sorry to use his sword on such a simpleton, so he decided to use a wooden stick instead. His name is Sille Binkristan. He will regret his arrogant judgment. Sille immediately lunged at him, saying that he would regret coming to this shop. This guy is just as insignificant as the rest of them. Tolbane replied that this wasn't the end. He threw a punch, but the man managed to duck. After that, Sille hit Tolbane. Then he pinned him against the wall. Sille assumed that this man couldn't even imagine that the owner of a wine shop could be so strong. And that look reminded him of his own days as a knight. Tolbine learned that Sille was a knight. He was no longer a knight. He didn't need money, so he should take his men and leave. It had been a long time since he had had so much fun. Tolbane didn't want this bastard to end up so arbitrarily. Sille seemed to have anticipated this outcome. He even said that if this guy lost control, he would die. Tolbane fell right in front of Julitan and Shio. Lee asked why he was doing this. Sille replied that he was creating memories she would never forget. Shio tried to bring the guy to his senses. Then the main character noticed a familiar face. He immediately recognized Sille. Lee also recognized Julitan. And then he saw Lady Lee. The man was glad that Mr. Noblesse had come. Sille didn't expect it to be Noblesse. After all, they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Sille told Karina to bring his sword. They were talking about Hunsa. Lee told him to stop. However, Sille wanted to find out something. He didn't know how Noblesse had become the leader of the Gasball fleet, but the man wanted to see if he was suitable for the role. Lee told him to stop, because this was too serious a joke. Sille asked if she still thought he was joking. He only judges his enemies by their swords, because he doesn't know how to do anything else. If his rank was just a matter of luck, then Sille would take his position and all of Noblesse's secrets. Julitan couldn't refuse. It was a little cramped in there, so he suggested they go outside. Iketes asked if they should intervene. Lee replied that love that can be stopped is not real. In fact, she was also curious to see how much Julitan had changed, but she was worried because she hadn't seen Carnelian. It seemed like a lot had happened in all that time, but people had gathered to watch their duel, talking about how Mr. Noblesse had taken part in a duel. They had never seen anyone holding a sword in the city before. Julitan had never been a knight. Sille was right next to the guy in a second and hit him. Since Sille was not a knight, he did not use all his strength. However, if that was the extent of his abilities, then that was not very good. Julitan immediately jumped back. Sille is really strong. If the main character had made even one mistake, it would have been over right then and there. He immediately launched an attack. However, Zelid was not particularly impressed. He threw the guy off him. This is a high level of skill, but it's impossible to compete with Zelid. Then Zelid knocked the weapon out of his hands, breaking it. Zelid would give him a choice. It would be better for him to give up his position and live in the shadows, or hold on to his title and die by this sword. He needs to find someone, so he can't just die like this. What should he do now? Julitan decided to draw his second sword. And that was interesting. Julitan declared that he would defeat him. He prepared to attack. This sword looks so attractive that I want to try it out. Zelid also noticed that this guy had definitely changed. These guys seemed to be fighting on equal terms now. Then they jumped away from each other. A moment later, their weapons clashed again. Fortunately, Julitan's weapon was already at Zelid's throat. The man admitted that he had become a completely different person. Compared to that child, Julitan sheathed his weapon and held out his hand. Zelid shook his hand. Then they returned to the wine shop. So that means he absorbs life force. It's a demonic sword. Zelid wanted to know how much life force the guy had spent fighting alongside him. He doesn't know. Maybe 1 minute, 1 hour, or even 1 year. Since he didn't die right away, that means everything is fine. His words are so calm. There is nothing more precious than life. Julitan also wanted to know about her hair color. As it turned out, it was her natural hair color. At that time, her hair was dyed. In Reisenberg it was blue. Although it was too late to talk about it, he apologized for suddenly disappearing that time. Lee replied that it was all in the past. In the end, as long as they were all alive, everything was fine. Zelid will definitely kill that bastard Seda with his own hands someday. Although he had disappeared, sooner or later they would meet again. Julitan didn't expect Seed to hide. Didn't they know? That bastard killed hundreds of people in Hesfarkon and escaped. Shio also deeply wanted to kill Sade. Zelid asked if he also had a reason for revenge. That bastard's life wouldn't be boring, since so many people wanted to kill him. However, she wanted to know where Carnelian had gone. Julitan said that she had left him a year ago. Seals usually do not leave their masters. When a seal leaves, there is only one reason. When their master's life is in danger because of the seal. He believed that they would meet again. That's why he used such a terrifying sword to become strong enough for his seal to be near him. Lee asked if he could tell her what had happened to Julitan over the past year. It was not a very happy story. Zelid asked what had happened to Togo. There was alcohol here. 1 year ago, after Togo, as Carnelian left, he found himself imprisoned in an endless ocean. And there, in the middle of the sea, he encountered a sea dragon. Was he trying to say he had seen a dragon from the myths? It's hard to believe, but it's true. A year ago, then there was an island. Melkobin named it Zaratan. Tolbane didn't understand why the island was named after a pet, but they were surprised when they saw that the island began to move. It wasn't an island, but Zaratan, one of her loyal and trusted vassals. He was glad that Lady Melkobel had finally arrived. She introduced the children she had met along the way. They would stay here for a short time and be indebted to her. The children must stay here and train for a while. Julitan said that he had only once drawn his sword against Infitar. Immediately afterwards, he had fallen unconscious. She asked what the young man had been thinking when he drew his sword. Julitan had thought that he would no longer hesitate and would take responsibility. If he was going to take over the world, or if he had thought of something absurd, like killing Offenbach, he would have been dead from the start. Infitar would give him as much power as he wanted, but it would take just as much of his life energy. To handle this sword, he had to be able to control his desires. Suddenly, they saw a meteorite. Julitan noticed that she looked worried. Melkobel replied that if you disappear in a flash, you will remain only a fragment of a beautiful star. But if you reach the ground, this place will turn into a sea of fire. That is why Carnelian left Julitan. The meteorite flew right past the house. Then it reached the ground.